Daughter of the Moon. Narrated, illustrated, and written by Cynthia Louise. Chapter 1. The morning mist still clung to the valley when Diana Morgan rose before the sun. It was a habit she carried since childhood, this quiet claiming of the hours before Luna Valley woke. Before the pack stirred in their homes, and the smoke began to curl from chimneys and the sound of life filled the narrow dirt roads between the cabins. Before her father's door opened and she would hear Edna's flat voice carrying through the walls of the main house, arranging the day around herself like furniture. Before Ada's eyes found her across the breakfast table with that particular look that said, "You don't belong here," without ever opening her mouth. In the early morning, none of that existed yet. There was only the valley, the trees, and Diana. She pulled on her boots at the foot of her bed and sat for a moment in the gray half-light of her room, listening. The Morgan estate sat at the northern edge of Luna Valley, elevated just slightly above the rest of the pack's land, in the way an alpha's home was always positioned, for visibility so the alpha can protect the pack. Diana stood and went outside. The Morgan estate was handsome and well cared for, broad-timbered with a wide covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the main house and a secondary structure behind it where firewood was split and stored. The grounds ran deep, the back of the property dissolving into the edge of the forest that encircled all of Luna Valley like a dark green wall. Diana had grown up at the boundary of that forest. She knew every trail that threaded through it, every creek crossing the hollow and the ridge. She had mapped it first with her father, then alone. She crossed the yard in the mist, ducked through the wooden gate at the back, and followed the tree line north without fully entering the woods. Not yet. She ran her fingers along the rough bark of a hemlock as she walked, the cold of it pleasant against her palm. She stopped where the tree line curved north, and the ground rose slightly into a natural shelf of flat rock she had been coming to since she was a girl. The deep edge of the forest was private. No sight lines back to the estate, no paths from the village running nearby, just the trees and the cold air and the early morning solitude. She reached up and pulled her shirt over her head in one motion and folded it, then her trousers, then the rest, working quickly in the cold. She placed the folded clothes over the lowest branch of a young hemlock beside the rock shelf, arranged with enough care that they wouldn't fall, and stood for a moment in the cold dawn air and breathed. Then she shifted, the wolf rising up through her like a held breath releases, immediately and deeply satisfying. She hit the ground on 4 legs and ran toward the cold and dark space of the forest, into the dense hemlock stands where the snow still lay in the shadow, and the ground was soft beneath her paws. The world opened up into everything the human senses couldn't reach. She ran full force, pushing through the underbrush with a pure physical joy. The cold air poured through her, and her paws read the ground, and her nose read everything else. The fox trail that crossed the northern path, the creek smell carried on the east wind, the rich layered smell of the forest floor coming slowly alive under the retreating snow, the distant musk of a deer that had bedded somewhere in the hemlock hollow and was just now stirring. She chased none of it. She simply received it all, the world in its full-dimensioned reality, the wolf's version of the valley that the human version could only approximate. She ran until her blood was fully awake, and then she slowed and moved through the trees at an easy pace, nose to the ground. When the invigorated feeling satisfied her enough, she found her way back to the flat rock shelf by the hemlock, and she shifted back. She dressed quickly with the clothes still folded over the branch where she had left them. She pulled her shirt on and breathed the human version of the morning air, and it was good in its own way. The valley was beginning to lighten. The morning sunlight sent rays through her shiny long black hair and lit up her hazel eyes. Down the slope she could see the arrangement of the valley, the cluster of the pack homes with their gardens and outbuildings, the long communal hall at the center of town where meetings were held and celebrations gathered, the training ground to the east where the younger wolves sparred under the watch of the pack's senior fighters. Luna Valley was not the largest pack in the region, but it was old and it was proud, and under her father's leadership it had been peaceful for nearly 3 decades. She stopped at the crest of the small rise in the terrain and looked down at it in the early light, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Alpha King Hector Morgan had built much of what she could see, or overseen in its building, or maintained what had stood before him. His name was in the lumber and the stone and the shape of the roads. It was also in her. She understood that without vanity. The way she moved through the world, watchful and quietly purposeful, was his doing, his teaching, his investment in her, deliberate and constant since she had been old enough to understand what she was being prepared for. She would be Alpha Queen. Hector had 2 daughters, and Diana was the eldest by 18 months. The succession was clear, or so she understood it to be. She returned to the house as the first real light arrived, and found her father already at the kitchen table, which was unusual. Hector Morgan was a large man, like most pack alphas, broad through the chest and shoulders. His hair had gone silver at the temples in recent years, and there were deep lines at the corner of his eyes. But he was still the most commanding presence in any room he occupied. He sat down at the table with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and his eyes on the window, and when Diana came in, he turned and smiled at her. "You were out early," he said. "I always am." She came to the table, leaning down to kiss his temple before taking the chair across from him. "Sit with me a minute before the house wakes up." Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. He seemed tired, and there were shadows under his eyes that had been there for several weeks. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Nothing today." He took a slow drink of his coffee. "If something happens to me, you're ready to be Alpha. I want you to know that I believe that. Whatever else happens, whatever anyone says," he paused briefly, "you are ready, Diana." "Whatever anyone says," she noted the phrase as she set it aside for later examination. "You've made sure of it," she said. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that she couldn't entirely read. Pride was in it, certainly, but also something that looked like grief. "Your mother would have," he began, and then stopped himself. He did that sometimes, started sentences about her mother, and could not finish them. Diana never pressed him on it. She had learned early that the subject of her mother was a door that Hector could not open for long, without it costing him something. What little she knew she had gathered in fragments over the years. Her mother's name, the fact that she had been kind, the fact that she was gone. "I know," Diana said. The creak of the footsteps on the stairs above them ended the moment. Hector straightened in his chair. A small adjustment, putting his composure back in place. He lifted his coffee mug again. Diana turned toward the doorway. Edna came in first. She was a lean, sharp-featured woman who carried herself with deliberate elegance, and had decided long ago that elegance was a form of armor. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back, and her posture was perfect. She swept her gaze across the kitchen as she entered, taking in the table, the coffee pot, Diana and her husband, and the order of that inventory was visible in her eyes, even if her face remained pleasant. "You're both up early," she said, moving to the counter to pour herself coffee. Edna brought her cup to the table and sat. There was nothing impolite in anything she did. Edna was never impolite to Diana. She was simply adjacent, present in the same spaces, maintaining a surface of civility so consistent and so smooth that it had taken Diana years to understand that a surface was all it was. She had been a child the first time she understood that Edna did not love her. She had been older before she accepted that Edna never would. Ada arrived a few minutes later with her dark, wavy hair loose and her dark eyes still soft from sleep. And the shift in the room was immediate. Edna's posture opened, the careful flatness of her expression warmed. Ada was 22 to Diana's almost 24, 18 months younger, and where Diana took after their father in her coloring and her build, and her seriousness, Ada had entirely different qualities. Lighter on her feet, quicker to laugh, with large dark eyes that knew how to be appealing, and used that knowledge freely. She was not unkind to Diana in any way a stranger would notice. She was sisterly and familiar, but not warm. "Morning," Ada said to the room, dropping into her chair and reaching for the steak and eggs on the table. Her eyes found Diana briefly, carrying nothing in particular on their surface. "You smell like a human today." "Maybe because I am half human." "Ada," Hector said in a voice of warning. "Don't ever say anything about that again." Hector had forbidden any of them from ever telling that secret. Nobody outside the immediate family knew that Diana's mother was human. Hector believed that most of the pack would not be bothered by it, but he wanted to prevent any ill treatment or resistance toward the future Alpha Queen. Ada shrugged one shoulder and took a bite of her steak, unconcerned. "I'm just making an observation." Hector looked at Diana. Diana looked back at him and gave a small, steady shake of her head. "I'm fine." She had given him that signal enough times over the years that it was reflexive. She drank her coffee. Outside, Luna Valley was fully awake now. She could hear it, voices down the slope, the distant percussion of the training ground beginning its morning work. Her pack, her people. Chapter 2. Diana secretly kept a photograph inside the cover of a journal she no longer wrote in, tucked flat against the back binding, where it would not slip out accidentally. The journal lived at the bottom of her cedar chest, beneath a folded wool blanket, and she did not take it out often, only on nights when the house was fully quiet. The photograph was small and slightly blurred at the edges. It showed a woman standing outside of a cabin that she recognized from deep in the woods, the day she wandered outside Luna Valley. It was abandoned and must have been hers. The woman was smiling. She had dark hair that fell loose to her shoulders and hazel eyes, and she was not a wolf. Her name was Moon. She was Diana's mother, and she had been entirely human. Diana found the photograph when she was 13, tucked inside a book on the highest shelf of her father's study. A shelf she had climbed to reach because the book's spine read Field Botany of the Northern Territories, and she had been going through a phase of intense interest in edible plants. She had pulled the book from the shelf, and the photograph had fallen out and landed face up on the floor at her feet, and she had stood there for a long time looking at it before she understood what she was looking at. She had known that she had a mother. Before she had actually finally been told the truth, she always assumed that her mother had been a wolf, a pack woman, one of them. She put the photograph in her pocket and climbed carefully down from the shelf and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time without moving. She never told her father she had taken it. He never mentioned it was gone. Hector Morgan had been 21 years old, not yet Alpha King of Luna Valley, when he met Moon out hunting one day in the forest. He was drawn to her beauty and her singing voice while she was hanging up laundry on the line to dry, and couldn't resist introducing himself. The two hit it off and couldn't be apart. Moon had become pregnant. The pregnancy had been complicated in ways that neither of them had anticipated. A woman carrying the child of a wolf faced risks that were not well understood, that Hector's trusted healer had tried to manage and in the end could not fully protect against. Moon had survived long enough to deliver Diana safely into the world. She had not survived the night. Hector had held his daughter and his grief at the same time, and in the weeks that followed, he made the decisions that shaped everything else. He had brought Diana's home to Luna Valley and kept Moon's identity private, telling the pack only that Diana's mother had passed, and that the matter was not one he would discuss. He inherited his Alpha King title soon after. Soon after, and without great joy, he entered a formal arrangement with Edna Voss, the daughter of a well-regarded pack family, with political connections that served Luna Valley's interests. It was a marriage of alliance, rather than desire, the kind of arrangement that pack alphas had made for centuries, sensible and cold at its core. Edna had understood this too. Diana believed that. What Edna had not fully anticipated was that understanding it and living it were different propositions, and that living in a house where evidence of her husband's real love existed in the form of a child with hazel eyes would be its own particular kind of wound. Diana had not known for a long time that Ada knew the truth. Ada was 18 when Diana noticed that her attitude toward her had changed. Eventually, she understood that Ada had been told that she was half human. Edna had finally told her daughter the thing she herself was forbidden from speaking out loud. She was Moon's daughter. She had hazel eyes, she was half human, and her father had loved her mother in a way he had never loved Edna. She sat at the cedar chest one evening in late autumn, the journal open on her knees, the photograph loose in her fingers. She studied her mother's face the way she had studied it 100 times, looking for the parts of herself that lived there, the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the expression in her smile. What was she like, Diana thought. The question had no answer she could find. She had the photograph and the weight she had seen her father carrying, and the fact of her own existence. That was all. She closed the journal and put it back in the chest and folded the blanket over it. She was her father's firstborn and the next Alpha Queen of Luna Valley, and half human, and she would never be ashamed of either half, whatever anyone said. She closed the cedar chest and went to bed. The valley was quiet outside her window, and she slept. Chapter 3. The first time Diana saw Eli, she was not trying to make an impression. She was coming back from the Eastern training ground on a Tuesday morning in early spring, sweat damp with her hair pulled back unevenly, and a fresh scrape along her forearm from a sparring session that had gone longer and harder than planned. She had been working with Gareth, the pack's senior combat trainer, a barrel-chested elder who had trained her father and treated Diana with the same absence of favoritism he applied to every student, which she had always respected and occasionally found exhausting. That morning he had pushed her through a ground defense sequence until she could execute it without thinking, and then pushed her through it again. Her muscles had the pleasant, worked-over ache of genuine effort. Gareth believed it was important to train both the human and the wolf. She was thinking about breakfast. She came around the side of the communal hall and nearly walked into her father, who was standing in the road with 2 men she didn't recognize, and the expression he wore when he was conducting pack business, while also wishing he were somewhere quieter. He turned at her approach, and his expression became warmer. "Diana," he extended a hand toward her. "Come here." She came, aware of the scrape on her arm and the state of her hair, and decided in the same breath that neither mattered. "This is Eldrick," Hector said, indicating the older of the 2 strangers, a heavy-set man with a silver-streaked beard. "Alpha King of Stonehaven Pack, and his son Eli." She looked at Eli. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than his father, with dark hair cut close on the sides and longer on the top, and a face that was very handsome. He had gray eyes, she noticed. They were looking at her with focused attention. "Diana Morgan," she said, and held out her hand. He took it. His grip was firm without being performative. "Eli Stone." "You've been sparring," he said, with a brief glance at her forearm. "Our trainer doesn't believe in short sessions." He smiled. "Neither does ours." Hector was already moving the conversation forward. Logistics, territory boundaries, a scheduled meeting at the estate for that afternoon, and Diana fell into step beside her father while Eli walked with his. And that was all. 3 minutes, maybe 4, a handshake and 2 sentences. She thought about it twice more before lunch, and then made a deliberate effort to stop. The Stonehaven Pack visit was diplomatic in nature, which meant it lasted 4 days and involved meals and meetings, and a formal tour of Luna Valley's territory boundaries that Hector led personally. Diana participated in the capacity she always participated in pack diplomacy. She was present, observant, increasingly involved as her father made a point of deferring to her judgment in small, visible ways, training her in real time for the role she would have one day. Eli was not what she had expected from an Alpha Prince. She had met others. They tended to be one of 2 types, either the loudly assured kind, who filled space aggressively and laughed too readily at their own observations, or the carefully cultivated kind who said all the correct things in the correct order and revealed nothing. Eli was neither. He was quiet and carefully chose what to say. When he spoke, it was worth hearing, and he actually listened in return. On the second evening, there was a communal dinner at the Great Hall. The whole pack gathering with their guests, long tables and loud conversation and the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat. Diana found herself seated across from Eli, by an arrangement she suspected was her father's doing, and they talked for the better part of 2 hours. She could not have said afterward what they talked about first. She learned that he had a younger brother who had moved to a different region entirely and lived amongst humans, which Eli mentioned without embarrassment. She told him about the Eastern Trail system she had mapped as a teenager. the years she had spent learning the valley's geography until she could navigate it blindfolded. She told him about discovering a cabin in the woods, and that it used to be her mother's, though she didn't tell him about her mother being human. He told her about a winter his pack had spent managing a territorial dispute with a neighboring group, the negotiation, the patience it required, the way his father had handled it. She told him about Gareth's training method, and he laughed, a real laugh, and said his pack trainer was apparently Gareth's twin. At some point she noticed that the table around them had grown louder and more chaotic as the evening progressed, and neither of them had quite kept up with it, that they had gradually become something like an island of quieter conversation inside the noise. She noticed it and didn't move to change it. When the evening ended, she went home thinking that she quite liked him, and that this was either very convenient or very inconvenient, and she genuinely couldn't tell which. He came back 6 weeks later without his father. He sent word ahead, a formal note to Hector, courteous and properly worded, expressing his interest in continuing the dialogue between the packs, and requesting permission to visit again. Hector read it at the breakfast table, set it down, and looked at Diana over his coffee, with an expression that communicated several things, simultaneously, none of which he put into words. "He's coming Thursday," Hector said. "All right," Diana said. Hector picked up his coffee. Diana ate her eggs. They did not discuss it further. She didn't take any particular care with her appearance on Thursday, and then, halfway through Wednesday evening, reconsidered, and decided there was no harm in taking some care, and then was briefly irritated at herself for the reconsideration, and then let it go. He arrived mid-morning, and Hector received him at the estate, and then found reasons to be elsewhere for most of the afternoon. Diana and Eli walked the northern trail along the tree line, moving at an easy pace with no particular destination, and it was both more or less comfortable than she expected. Less because she was aware of the deliberateness of it, the acknowledged purposefulness of his return, more because once they were actually walking and talking it became simply that, walking and talking, and she was good at both. "Your father's pack," he said at one point, gesturing back toward the valley below them. "It has a particular feeling. Some packs feel like administrations. This one feels like a place." "He built it to last," she said, "not to be impressive." "You can tell?" "What does Stonehaven feel like?" He thought about it. "Competent," he said, and laughed at himself a little, which sounds like an insult, but it isn't meant to be. "My father is very effective." They walked on. The valley was visible below them, catching the afternoon light, and Diana looked at it the way she always looked at it from this elevation, with love. "You're going to be good at this," Eli said quietly. She turned to look at him. "Alpha Queen," he said, "I mean it. I've met a few people being prepared for leadership, and most of them are being prepared to perform it. You're being prepared to actually do it. There's a difference." "Thank you." She held his gaze for a moment. "My father made sure of it." He came back after that, and then again. Sometimes they walked, sometimes they sat on the porch of the estate in the evening, and talked while the valley darkened around them. He met members of the pack, and was easy with them in a way that seemed natural rather than calculated. They liked him. Diana noticed that. The courtship was not declared in any formal sense, but everyone can tell it was headed in that direction. Her father seemed at peace with it. Edna noticed and said nothing, but gave looks about the subject that suggested the opposite of peace. Diana also noticed the way Ada watched Eli when she thought no one was looking. She had assumed Ada's interest was the ordinary kind. Eli was easy to look at, and charming in his quiet way, and he was an Alpha Prince, which had its own undeniable gravity. Ada looked at him the way someone might look at something appealing that was clearly meant for someone else. She didn't know how long Ada had known him, or that Ada had already tried to pursue him romantically, and lost before Diana had ever come around the side of the communal hall on that Tuesday morning. Ada had given her no reason to look more carefully, and so she looked at Eli instead, at the easy way he moved through her valley, at the gray eyes that paid attention, at the particular quality of his stillness when he listened to her, and she let herself, carefully and with both feet still on the ground, begin to feel something real. In late spring, on an evening when the valley smelled of new growth, and the light held on longer than it had any right to, They sat on the porch steps of the estate after everyone else had gone inside. The conversation had run down naturally into a comfortable quiet. Somewhere down the slope a child was laughing at something, the sound carrying up clean and bright in the still air. "I think," Eli said, not looking at her, looking at the valley, "that this is going to become something." She looked at the valley, too. "I think so, too," she said. Neither of them said anything further. The child's laughter faded, and the valley settled into its evening sounds, and they sat in the companionable quiet of two people who are beginning to understand that they are no longer strangers, that something is being built between them, one careful, honest conversation at a time. Shortly after Eli left, she found Ada in the front hallway. Whether her sister had been passing through or had been standing there deliberately positioned at the foot of the stairs where Diana would have to walk past her to reach her room was impossible to say. Ada had a talent for making deliberate things look accidental. She had practiced it her whole life. "He's gone?" Ada asked with a tone of someone making polite conversation about the weather. "He headed back to the guest quarters, yes." Diana moved towards the stairs. Ada turned slightly, tracking her. "He's very attentive, I'll give him that." Diana stopped. Something in the air had changed, a subtle pressure, the way it changed before a storm. She recognized the quality of it. She turned around and looked at her sister. "Was there something you wanted to say, Ada?" "I'm just making an observation." Ada's voice was smooth, her expression composed into something that resembled pleasantness without actually being it. "He used to look at me like that, you know. Before you arrived at that meeting and Hector made his little presentation," she tilted her head. "Did he ever mention that he and I already met?" The information landed. Diana kept her face still. "No," she said evenly. "No, I don't suppose he would have," Ada smiled. "We spent quite a bit of time together at the Eastern Territory Summit last year, before Father decided to play matchmaker." She paused, letting that sit. "He was very warm, very attentive. Like I said, I'm sure it means nothing." "Then why are you telling me?" Ada's smile didn't move, but something behind it sharpened. "Because I find it amusing," she said, "that you walk around this valley like everything in it was grown specifically for you. Father's attention, Father's plans, Father's titles." Her voice had dropped slightly, taken on a different texture. The pleasantness was gone now. The smoothness still there, but serving something colder. And now Father's hand-picked prince following you around like you invented something no one ever thought of before. She exhaled lightly through her nose. "You're not that extraordinary, Diana. You're just first." The hallway was very quiet. "Good night, Ada," Diana said. "He deserves better than a half-born alpha playing at royalty," Ada said, and her voice cracked on it just slightly, a hairline fracture in the composure that told Diana everything she needed to know about how deep this went and how long it had been living there. Diana looked at her for one long moment. She did not raise her voice. She did not take it the bait of half-born, even though it landed like a blade, and Ada knew exactly what she meant by it. "Good night," she said again quietly, and went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a moment, her hands still in her lap. Then she breathed out slowly and let it go, or tried to, or told herself that she had, which was not quite the same thing. Below her, the front hallway was silent. Chapter 4. The trouble with the Duskfell pack had been building for the better part of 2 years. Diana had watched them closely, learning of the problem and its details. The Duskfell territory lay to the southeast, past the ridge line that marked Luna Valley's formal boundary. And for most of Hector's reign, they had been a negligible concern. A smaller pack, loosely organized, with a rotating cast of leadership that suggested chronic internal instability. Packs like that tended toward one of the two outcomes. They dissolved quietly, absorbed by larger groups, or simply scattered. Or they found someone ruthless enough to consolidate them, and became dangerous precisely because they had nothing to lose. The Duskfell pack had found their someone. His name was Clay, and Diana had learned enough about him in pack council meetings over the past 18 months to have assembled a picture she didn't like. He had come from the outside of the Duskfell territory entirely, from someplace further south where the packs ran leaner and harder and operated by rules that the northern territories had largely set aside generations ago. He had taken control of the Duskfell through a series of moves so swift and complete that by the time anyone understood what was happening, it was already done. 3 of Duskfell's senior wolves had died in circumstances that were called accidents. The 4th had submitted. Within 6 months of Clay's arrival, the Duskfell had begun testing Luna Valley's southeastern boundary. Small things at first, scouts crossing the line and retreating before they could be formally intercepted. A hunting party that strayed into protected territory and claimed ignorance. A message sent to Hector that was worded just carefully enough to avoid being an explicit threat, while leaving no doubt about its meaning. Her father had responded to each incursion with measured firmness, documenting everything, pressing for formal pack council arbitration, keeping the situation from escalating while making clear that Luna Valley's boundaries would be enforced. Diana had sat in those council meetings and listened and watched her father work, and understood that he was doing the right thing, and also that the right thing was not going to be enough. Clay was not interested in arbitration. Clay was building towards something. She had said as much to Hector privately, and he had looked at her with an expression that was equal parts tired and proud, and said, "I know. I'm trying to give him every reason not to." The attack came on Thursday in late summer, just before dawn. It was a raid, 12 of them, crossing the southeastern boundary in wolf form in the dark, moving fast and low toward the outer homesteads of Luna Valley, where the pack's perimeter was thinnest. Their aim appeared to be destruction, rather than occupation, damaging structures, threatening families, demonstrating that Luna Valley's boundary was not the protection its alpha claimed it was. Hector's sentries caught the incursion early. The alarm went through the pack in minutes. Diana had her boots on before the second signal howl finished echoing. She was not kept back from it. Her father had never kept her back from the operational realities of pack defense. Had always insisted she understood the full picture, but she arrived at the southeastern boundary to find the engagement already underway, and her father already in the middle of it. He was in wolf form, and even at distance, even in the dark, she could identify him instantly. The size of him, the particular authority in the way he moved. 3 Duskfell wolves had engaged him simultaneously in what was clearly a coordinated strategy, and he was handling it, though not without effort. Diana shifted and entered the fight at the flank, and the rest of the Luna Valley wolves pressed the advantage, and within 20 minutes the Duskfell raiders were retreating back across the boundary. They had won. The raid had failed. She found her father at the edge of the tree line afterward, shifted back to human form, breathing hard. He had a long wound across his right shoulder and upper arm, a deep gash from a wolf's claws, and she went to him immediately, calling for the pack healer. "I'm fine," he said. "You're bleeding significantly." "I've bled before." But he sat down on the fallen log she steered him toward, and he let the healer come. Diana stood close and watched the wound being cleaned and dressed, and told herself the unease she was feeling was simply adrenaline. It wasn't adrenaline. The wound did not heal the way a wolf's wound should heal. By the end of the first day, it was already apparent. A slowness to the healing, a heat that did not diminish, a grayness spreading in a ring around the edges of the injury that the healer looked at with an expression she did not bother to conceal from Diana. "Poison," the healer said quietly, when Hector was resting and they were outside the door, "on the claws." Diana stood very still. "What kind?" "Something I haven't seen before. It works against the healing, slows it, disrupts it." She paused. "I'm going to do everything I can." "I know you will," Diana said. "What does everything you can look like?" The healer told her. Diana listened to all of it without interrupting, and then thanked her and went for a walk in the forest, because she needed 20 minutes alone, and the forest was where she went for comfort. She stood among the hemlocks and breathed. The valley was quiet around her. The raid had been repelled. The pack was intact. Her father was alive and being cared for. She breathed and let herself know what she already knew, which was that poisoned claws were not the choice of a pack that was looking for a deterrent. They were the choice of a pack that was looking for a particular outcome. Then she went back inside and sat with her father. Hector fought it with patience and without complaint. There were better weeks and worse weeks. The healer worked through every treatment she knew and consulted healers from 2 neighboring packs and made progress in small increments, managing what she could not fully cure. The poison had done something to the healing mechanism in him that could be slowed but not reversed entirely. He remained functional, present, himself in all the ways that mattered, but he was thinner than he had been, and the color in his face was different, and there were mornings when he stayed in bed until mid-morning, which he had never done in Diana's memory. The pack saw it. They did not speak of it openly, but she could feel it in the way they looked at her. A subtle shift in the weight of their attention, a preparation. Eli came more frequently. He didn't arrive with the energy of someone managing a crisis. He just appeared more often and stayed longer. He sat with Hector and talked with him about pack matters and the broader territory dynamics and the Duskfell situation, which Hector tracked with undiminished sharpness even as his body continued to slow. He sat with Diana in the evenings, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they didn't, and both were fine. She was grateful for him in a way she had difficulty articulating, and so mostly didn't try, but she thought he understood it anyway. He was good at understanding things she didn't say. It was Sunday in early winter when Hector asked Diana to come to his study alone. She knew before she got there. There was something in the way he had asked. He had decided it was his time. She paused outside the door for one breath, two, and then opened it and went in. He was in his chair by the window, the one he always favored, with the view down the slope toward the valley. He looked smaller than he had in summer, though he was still himself, still Hector, still her father, still the shape that had oriented her whole life. He had a wool blanket across his lap that she was certain Edna had put there, and equally certain he had not asked for, and the winter light coming through the window was thin and pale. She pulled the chair close to him and sat. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "You have her eyes," he said. Something moved through his face. "Those are your mother's eyes." The room was very quiet. "Tell me about her," Diana said. She had never asked directly. He looked at the window for a moment, and she thought he might deflect the way he always had. Might start a sentence and let it dissolve. Instead, he began to speak. He told her that Moon had been the most genuinely courageous person he had ever met, and that her courage had nothing performative in it. That it was simply how she moved through a world that gave her every reason to be afraid. He told her that Moon had known, going into it, what the risks were, that carrying an Alpha's child as a human woman was not without danger, that the healers had been honest with her about this, and that she had made her choice with full knowledge and without asking him to talk her out of it. He told her that Moon had laughed easily and thought carefully and had loved the forests of her home, her cabin in the woods. He told her that Moon had held Diana for 3 hours after she was born, which was all the time there was, and that she had spent most of it talking to her. "What did she say?" Diana asked. "I couldn't hear most of it," he said. "She was speaking very quietly, just to you." He paused. "She said your name at the end. She had chosen it herself. She said—" He stopped, cleared his throat, and continued. "Diana means goddess of the moon." Diana looked at the window. "She would have been so proud of you," Hector said. "I want you to know that I believe that with everything in me. I knew her, and I know you, and I am absolutely certain of it." "You've made sure I was worth being proud of," Diana said. Her voice was level. She was working to keep it that way. "No," he shook his head. "I gave you everything I could give you. What you made of it, that was yours. The way you carry this pack in your mind, the way you think about your people. I didn't put that in you. That came from somewhere else." He paused. "From her, maybe. From you. I don't know exactly where those two things stop and start." She reached over and took his hand, and he let her, and they sat like that for a minute. "I need to tell you some things," he said, then shifting into a different register. Still quiet, but the quiet of intention. "Practical things. Will you hear them?" "Of course." He told her about Eli first. He said that he and Eldrick had been speaking seriously well before Eli had come to Luna Valley that first Tuesday in spring, about the possibility of a merger between their packs. That the Duskfell situation had accelerated what had been a longer-term conversation. That a merged pack, Luna Valley's territory and deep roots combined with Stonehaven's numbers and Eldrick's southeastern connections, would be a significantly more formidable thing than either pack standing alone. that Clay and whatever he was building would be far less of a viable threat against something that size. "I'm not telling you to marry Eli," he said carefully, and then looked at her. "I'm telling you that the strategic case is real. What you've been building with him, I think that's also real. And I think you know it. But I want you to understand that there's more than one reason I'm glad of it." "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." He nodded. "He's a good man. I believe that." "So do I." "Good." Something in him settled. "Then I can leave that one alone." He told her about the council next, the specific members, their particular concerns and loyalties, the ones she could trust entirely and the ones who would need careful management, the ones who were governed primarily by tradition and the ones who were governed primarily by interest. He told her things about the Pact's finances and territorial agreements and long-standing interpersonal histories that he had not told her before, the last layer of information being transferred to the person who would need it. She listened to all of it and asked clarifying questions and stored everything away with the same systematic attention she had been applying to his teaching for 20 years. When he was done, he leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He looked very tired and also, she thought, lighter, like a man who has set something down. "You are ready," he said, with his eyes still closed. "I know I've said it before. I need you to actually believe it." "I'm working on it." He opened his eyes and looked at her and smiled. The full smile, the one she had known her whole life. "I know. That's how I know you're ready. People who aren't ready never question whether they are." She squeezed his hand once and then released it, and they sat together in the winter light for a while longer, not talking, watching the valley below through the window. He died on Tuesday, 11 days later, in his bed. In the early morning, with the valley still quiet outside and the healer present, and Diana on one side of him and Edna on the other, he simply went, gently, the way a lamp goes when the oil is finally spent. The healer confirmed it quietly. Edna rose from her chair and left the room without speaking. Diana stayed where she was for a long time. Luna Valley mourned collectively, the grief belonging to everyone at once. The communal hall filled with people who wanted to be near other people who understood what had been lost. Food appeared on tables, fires were kept burning. The older wolves told stories about Hector that Diana had never heard, small particular stories about things he had done or said in the course of an ordinary life. And she sat among them and listened and received each one as the gift it was. Eli arrived the morning after and stayed. He didn't fill the space with words. He was simply there, solid and present at the edge of things, and when Diana finally came apart privately one afternoon, briefly, alone in her father's study with the door closed, she came back together again and went outside, and he was still there. And that was enough. The coronation and blood moon ritual was scheduled 4 days away, the night of the next blood moon. The pack looked to Diana. She let them look. She stood up straight under the weight of it and looked back, and she did not flinch. What she did not see, because she was not looking there, was happening behind the closed door of Edna's sitting room on the night of the 3rd day after Hector's death. Edna sat in her chair by the low lamp, the same chair, the same lamp, but the grief on her face, which had been present and visible in public throughout the mourning period, was no longer present. What was present was something far more organized. She held a small glass of dark wine, and she was looking in the distance with a satisfied expression. She had been waiting for a particular door to open, and had just heard the latch. Ada sat across from her, her long legs tucked behind her, her dark eyes bright with something that she was not yet ready to name. 4 more days, Edna said. 4 more days, Ada agreed. The lamp between them burned low. Outside, the valley grieved in the dark. Inside this room, something else was happening entirely. Something patient and cold and long in the making, finally beginning to move. Edna took a slow sip of her wine. "Then we had better begin," she said. Chapter 5. The days between her father's death and the coronation were the longest of Diana's life, and also, in their strange way, among the most clarifying. Grief did that, she discovered. It stripped things down to what they actually were. In the days following Hector's death, she found that she had very little patience for performance of any kind, for the careful social management she had always applied to her interactions with Edna, for the practiced neutrality she maintained around Ada, for the particular exhausting work of being agreeable in rooms where she was not entirely welcome. She did not become rude, she simply became more plainly herself, and discovered that most of the pack responded to this well, and the ones who didn't were the ones whose opinions had never been fully trustworthy to begin with. She ran the pack. That was not a ceremonial description. In the absence of a crowned alpha, the practical work of leadership fell to her, and she did it. A council meeting, territorial correspondence, the ongoing monitoring of the Duskfell situation, the 100 small decisions that kept a community functioning. She did it with the preparation of 20 years, and the awareness that everyone was watching to see how she held the weight, and she held it without visible strain. And this was the only performance. The work gave her somewhere to put the grief. Eli came without fail. He was navigating his own set of pressures. His father, Aldrich, was pushing the merger conversation harder now. He was an older man who decided he understood the urgency better than the young. And there were council members on the Stonehaven side who had opinions about timing and precedent, and the proper ordering of events. Eli managed all of it with the same composed patience Diana had come to recognize as one of his defining qualities. And when he arrived at Luna Valley, he set it down at the boundary and was simply present with her. They had not formally declared their intentions like the pacts would eventually require, but their future was apparent to anyone who looked, and most people were looking. She did not look too far ahead. She kept her eyes on the ground directly in front of her and put one foot down and then the other. The blood moon ritual and coronation was that night, and Marin, the ritual keeper, came to find her. Marin was 61 years old and had been the pack's ritual keeper for longer than Diana had been alive, inheriting the role from the woman who had held it before her, and tending it with the seriousness of someone who understood that certain things needed tending. She was small and unhurried, with white hair she wore in a long braid, and hands that were always slightly stained from plant work that most of her ritual preparation involved. Diana had known her since childhood. Marin had been a fixture of pack ceremonies for as long as Diana could remember, present at the edges of important moments, observing with her particular quality of attentiveness that was not intrusive, but never missed anything. More relevantly, she had been one of the trusted names Hector had given her. That afternoon in the study, in the thin winter light, with his hand in hers, her father had gone through this list carefully. These are the ones you can trust without qualification. Marin had been the first. He said it without elaboration, which was itself a kind of emphasis. The people he trusted most were the ones he didn't feel the need to argue a case for. Marin came to the estate 3 hours before the coronation, in the late afternoon, and asked for Diana privately. She came into the sitting room and closed the door behind her with a quietness that seemed intentional, and she did not sit down immediately. She looked at Diana with the assessing attentiveness Diana associated with her, and then said, "Your father spoke to me before he died." "About the ritual?" Diana said. It was not a question. She had arrived at it in the second that Marin's expression told her this was not a social call. "About the ritual." Marin sat down, then, folding her hands in her lap. "You know the traditional sequence. The blood moon rite is conducted the evening of the coronation, witnessed by the senior council members and the pack elders before the crowning ceremony." "Yes." "Your father asked me to conduct it earlier." She held Diana's gaze steadily, privately, before the official ceremony, before any witnesses. Diana looked at her for a moment. "Why?" Marin considered her words carefully. "He didn't tell me everything. He told me enough." She paused. "He said that he trusted the ritual itself, but that he was not certain he trusted every person who would be present to witness it. He asked me to make sure that the rite was completed before the ceremony, regardless of what happened during the ceremony." She let that sit for a moment. Diana thought about Edna's sitting room and the low lamp. She thought about Ada in the hallway with that hairline fracture in her voice. She thought about her father in the winter light, already knowing things she didn't know, trying to leave her as protected as he could. "I understand," she said. "There are things about this rite I need to prepare you for," Marin said. "It is not a gentle process. It asks something real of the person going through it. Your father went through it. His father before him. Every alpha this pack has had for 6 generations has come through this room." She paused. It's different for each person. I can tell you what to expect in general, but I cannot tell you exactly what you'll experience. No one can. We need to perform this ritual just as soon as the moon comes up, and before its scheduled time." "When?" Diana asked. She decided to trust her, and not ask why. "The sun is going down right now. Come with me." She followed Marin to her cottage. Marin's cottage sat at the western edge of the pack settlement, slightly apart from its nearest neighbors, with a kitchen garden on one side and a shed on the other, that held tools and dried plants in hanging bundles, and things Diana had never examined closely, because they clearly belonged to a category of knowledge she hadn't yet been invited into. Inside was unlike the cottage's modest exterior. It was a small, practical room. The table had been cleared and prepared in a way that transformed it, covered with a dark cloth, and arranged with objects that Diana recognized from the public ceremonies she had witnessed over the years. The carved stone bowl her father's pack had carried for generations, a bundle of dried herbs whose smoke she associated with every important ritual she could remember, a vial of something dark, and a candle that burned with a flame slightly too still for the air in the room. There was also a clay cup. "Sit," Marin said, and Diana sat in the chair across the table from her, and the door was closed, and it was just the two of them. Marin began without preamble. She explained the rite's structure in the same practical, unhurried voice she used for everything. The sequence of it, the 3 parts, what each part required of Diana, and what it would feel like in the body. She spoke about the blood moon's significance to Alpha succession, the way the rite had been developed over generations as mechanism, a genuine transfer rather than a symbolic one. She explained that the timing was deliberate, that certain things could only move under certain conditions. "The gift passes through the bloodline," Marin said, "but the rite opens the door. Without the rite, the capacity is there, but dormant. With it," she paused, "with it, the door opens. What comes through depends on what was always in you." "You don't know what it will be," Diana said. "I never know. Your father's was presence. The room changed when he entered it, physically changed, the way the air changes before lightning. You will have felt it your whole life without understanding what it was." She looked at Diana. "Yours will be its own thing." Diana looked at the clay cup. "What's in it?" Marin told her it was plants and minerals and something older that the ritual keeper did not name precisely, but the function was clear enough. It prepared the body to receive what the rite delivered. It would disorient her. That was not a side effect, that was part of it. "Disorientation is the opening," Marin said. "The ordinary mind holds too tight. The cup loosens the grip." She met Diana's eyes. "You will feel like you're losing something. You're not losing anything. You're making room." Diana picked up the cup. It smelled of earth. She held it for a moment, feeling the warmth of the clay against her palms, and thought of her father sitting in this chair or one like it, perhaps in this same room on the night before he became what she had always known him to be. She sat in front of the window, exposed to the newly risen full moon, and drank. Then the disorientation arrived. It was not frightening, exactly. It was more like the world had shifted slightly off its axis. She was aware of the room around her, but the room had acquired a quality she couldn't name, a depth that it hadn't had before. She was aware of Marin across the table, and of the candle, and of the stone bowl, and each of these things seemed to occupy more space than they had a moment ago, seemed to matter more. She was aware of the pack outside the cottage walls, like a vibration at a frequency she was only now calibrated to receive. The pack, her pack. Dozens of heartbeats and presences, some sleeping, some at the edge of the sleep, the whole breathing organism of the community she had been born into and grown up inside, and spent her entire life preparing to lead. She had always known they were there. She had never felt them before. She gripped the table, and Marin said, from a direction that seemed to shift slightly as she spoke, "Stay with me. Don't reach for it. Let it come to you." Diana released the table. She let go. She stopped reaching for the solid edges of things and simply let the disorientation move through her without bracing against it. And when she did, something happened. It did not announce itself with light or sound, or any of the qualities she might have anticipated if she thought to anticipate anything. It was more like a key turning in a lock that had always been there, that she had always carried, that she hadn't known was a lock because she had never had the key before. Something opened. and through the opening came warmth, a warmth entirely different from the cup's warmth, deeper and more settled, something that felt less like a sensation and more like a quality, like a new room discovered in a house she had lived in her entire life. She sat with it, she breathed with it. She did not know what it was, only that it was real, and that it was hers, and that it had always been hers, waiting. Marion was watching her with an expression Diana could not read clearly in her current state, but which looked like recognition. The candle flame was still. She came back to the ordinary world gradually, in increments, each breath bringing the familiar into clearer focus. The room stopped spinning, and the table was solid under her hands. She felt different. She could not have itemized the difference precisely. The world looked the same, and yet something in the quality of her attention had changed, and how information arrived to her from the room around her. "How do you feel?" Marion asked. Diana considered the question with care. "Like something happened," she said finally. Marion nodded slowly. "Something did." "What?" She stopped. She wasn't sure how to ask the question. "What did you see?" The ritual keeper was quiet for a moment. "The rite was received," she said. "The power moved." She paused. "I saw your eyes change for a moment, just for a moment." "Change how?" Marion looked at her. "They went very still," she said, "like water before it freezes." She folded her hands on the table. "I've done this rite 6 times, Diana. I've never seen that before." Diana sat with this. The warmth was still there, constant beneath her sternum. It didn't feel threatening or foreign. It felt like hers. "You won't tell me what it means," she said. "I can't tell you what I don't know," Marion said. "Each Alpha's power is their own. It reveals itself in time under the right conditions." She paused. "Under pressure, under need. Be patient with it. It knows what it is, even if you don't yet." Diana nodded. She was very tired suddenly. She rose to leave, and Marion walked her to the door. The village was dark, and the moon had just come out. The air outside was cold and clean, and she breathed it deeply. "Marion," she said, at the threshold. "Yes?" "My father asked you to do this early, before any witnesses." She turned to look at the older woman. He knew something might go wrong at this ceremony. Marion met her eyes without flinching. "He was a very thorough man," she said. "He loved you very much. The 2 things went together, I think." Diana looked at her for a moment, and then nodded once, and turned and walked back up through the village toward the estate. Above her the winter stars were out, cold and very clear, and the valley breathed around her in its sleep. And she moved through it like what she was, what she had always been, what she had now, finally and formally and irrevocably become. Its Alpha. Her coronation only a half-hour away. Chapter 6. Diana stood at her bedroom window in the moonlight. The valley below was already moving. She could see figures crossing the common ground. The communal hall doors thrown open for the celebration that everyone expected. Banners in the pack's colors had been hung along the road from the estate to the hall. Someone had placed flowers along the wooden fence posts. Luna Valley had dressed itself for a coronation. She turned from the window and finished dressing. She had chosen her clothes with care the night before. Not a performance of finery, but something that was right. Dark trousers, well fitted, a deep green tunic that had been her father's color, a choice she had made deliberately and without sentimentality, because sentiment and deliberateness were not opposites, and she saw no reason to pretend they were. Her boots were polished, her hair was down, dark, and straight to her lower back. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm that she was ready. Then she picked up her father's ring from the top of the dresser, a heavy silver band engraved with the pack sign that Hector had worn every day of his Alpha reign, which Marion had given her after his death, and she put it on her right hand where it fit almost perfectly. She breathed in, she breathed out, she went downstairs. The household was unusually quiet for an evening of such significance. Edna was already gone, had left early. One of the house staff mentioned to take her place among the senior pack families at the ceremony. Ada's door had been closed when Diana passed it in the hallway. Diana had not knocked. She walked to the communal hall alone, which was how she wanted it. The pack lined the road as she came, not in any formal arrangement, just people who had come out of their homes to watch her pass, and the watching was warm. She knew most of them by name. She knew their children and their histories, and their particular concerns and loyalties. Old Petra from the eastern homestead pressed both of her hands when Diana reached her. holding on for a moment with a grip stronger than her age suggested. And said nothing, just looked at her with dark eyes that said everything. Young Cass, barely 12, and already training with Gareth, stood very straight and serious as she passed, which made Diana want to smile, and she let herself. She received all of it, the warmth and the attention and the weight of their hope, and she carried it with her down the road. Beneath her sternum, she could still feel the warmth from the ritual. It had not left her since Marin's cottage half an hour ago. It was simply part of her now, patient, waiting for whatever alpha skills she was going to have. The ceremonial ground was at the center of the valley, an opening that the pack maintained specifically for this purpose, large enough to hold the entire community, bounded on the north side by the ancient standing stones that predated any structure in Luna Valley by several generations. The stones were not decorative, they were the oldest thing the pack had, carried from the original territory and replanted here when Luna Valley was first settled, and the ritual significance attached to them was not metaphorical. Things conducted within their boundary held. The pack was assembled when Diana arrived. She felt the shift in the crowd as she came through, a collective attention turning toward her, a held breath. She walked through the parting crowd to the center of the clearing with her shoulders level and her father's ring on her right hand, and she took her place before the standing stones. She found Eli immediately. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, positioned to her right, just inside the stone boundary, in the formal placement designated for the intended consort of the incoming Alpha. He was wearing Stonehaven's colors, and he was looking at her, and when their eyes met, something in his expression settled into quiet certainty. The look of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. She held his gaze for a moment. She let herself have that moment fully. The sight of him standing there, real and chosen. She let herself have it because something in the back of her mind, some old instinct she couldn't name, told her to look carefully, to remember it. Then she faced forward. Marin stood before the standing stones with the carved bowl and the ceremonial elements, her white braid over one shoulder, her face composed into the ceremonial stillness she wore for rites. The senior council members were arranged in a formal line to the left. The pack elders stood at the outer boundary. The whole of Luna Valley was present. She could feel them behind her, the warm, pressing weight of their collective presence, the vibration of them she had first noticed in Marin's cottage, and had not stopped noticing since. Marin began to speak. Diana was going to let Marin decide whether or not to tell everyone she had already performed the blood moon ritual earlier. The words of the opening invocation were old, older than written record, passed keeper to keeper, the same syllables that had opened every alpha succession rite Luna Valley had conducted. Diana had heard them before at her father's ceremonies, and at the ceremonies before that, but hearing them now, standing in the center of them, was entirely different. They landed differently, they had weight. She breathed, she was ready. She did not hear Ada's footsteps, she heard the shift in the crowd first. It was subtle, a change in the quality of the silence behind her, a small collective intake. Marin's voice slowed, not stopping, but faltering, which Diana had never heard it do. She turned. Ada was walking toward the center of the clearing. She moved as though she rehearsed this, chosen each element of it, the pace, the angle of approach, and the expression on her face. She was dressed as though it was a ceremony for herself, Diana noticed. Behind her, at the outer edge of the crowd, Edna stood very still with her hands folded in front of her and a smile on her face that she was not troubling herself to conceal. It was a cold smile, thin as a blade, watching something she had planned for a long time finally begin. Ada stopped 10 feet from Diana. The clearing was absolutely silent. "I'm sorry," Ada said to the assembly rather than to Diana, her voice carrying cleanly in the still air. She had placed herself carefully for acoustics. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I've stayed silent about this for a very long time, out of respect for our father." She paused. The pause was timed. "But I cannot, in good conscience, watch this pack place its future in the hands of someone who is not fully one of us." Diana felt the warmth beneath her sternum flare once, and then settle. "Diana Morgan," Ada said, and now she did look at Diana, her dark eyes direct and careful, carrying something that might have been triumph, dressed in the costume of sorrow, "is not a full-blooded wolf." She let the silence that followed run for exactly the right number of seconds, Her mother was human, a human woman. Diana is half human, and this pack deserves to know that before they crown her their Alpha Queen, the crowd broke open. The sound of a community receiving information that rearranges what it thought it knew. She heard it in layers behind her. The sharp, indrawn breaths, the louder voices beginning at the edges and moving inward, questions and exclamations, and the particular pitch of collective shock. She heard someone say Hector's daughter, and someone else say, half human, and someone closer say, is it true? And she did not turn around to look at any of it. She looked at Ada. Ada looked back at her with that composed, practical expression and waited. And Diana understood in that moment exactly what was being offered to her. The implicit invitation in Ada's waiting. The space being held open for denial, for outrage, for the kind of reaction that would muddy the water and shift the conversation toward Diana's response, rather than the truth of what had been said. She understood it, and she set it aside. She thought of Moon. She thought of a woman standing at the edge of the forest in front of her cabin, half turned toward a camera, caught in an unguarded smile. She thought of her father's voice saying, she held you for 3 hours. She spent most of it talking to you. She said your name at the end. She thought of the photograph at the bottom of the cedar chest, the hazel eyes and the dark hair, and the expression that was alert and present and unafraid. She thought of what it would mean to deny her now. What would it cost? What would it say about the 10 years she had spent carrying Moon's existence quietly and with dignity in the face of everyone in this family who had wanted her to be ashamed of it? She lifted her chin. It's true, she said. Her voice was clear, and it carried to the edges of the clearing without effort. My mother's name was Moon. She was human. She loved my father, and he loved her, and she died the night I was born. She held Ada's gaze without blinking. I am half human, and I am Hector Morgan's firstborn daughter, and I will not deny either of those things, not today, and not ever. The crowd stirred again differently this time. She didn't turn to read it, she kept her eyes forward. The council withdrew to deliberate. It was the head councilman, Roland, who made the announcement. A gray-haired man of 60 who had served on the council since Diana's father's first years of leadership, and whom Hector had named in his list of trustworthy members. He looked uncomfortable and sad. Diana thought he looked like he was being moved in a direction he was not comfortable moving. He announced the pause with formal language, and the assembly shifted and regrouped. The ceremony suspended in an uneasy collective waiting. Diana stood where she was. She was aware of Marin nearby, the ritual keeper's eyes on her with an expression that was careful and something else she didn't have time to examine. She was aware of Eli still at his position, his gray eyes following her with a focused attention that she received, but couldn't fully look at right now. She was aware of Ada, who had moved back to stand near Edna at the crowd's edge, the two of them in quiet conversation. She watched Edna move. She would think about this later, and how clearly she saw it, in real time, and how powerless she was to do anything about it in that moment. Edna was not loud about it. She was never loud about anything. She moved through the periphery of the council's gathered cluster with social ease, as if she spent 30 years cultivating relationships precisely for moments like this, stopping briefly at one council member and then another, her hand touching an arm here, her head bending close for an exchange there. She did not appear to be lobbying. That had taken place earlier. She appeared to be comforting. The distinction was cosmetic and deliberate. Diana watched and kept her face still and breathed. The council deliberated for 20 minutes, then they returned. Roland stood at the front of the assembly with his hands clasped and his face arranged into an expression of formal regret that Diana identified immediately as rehearsed. He had known what he was going to say. She understood that the moment she saw his face. The council has reviewed the matter, Roland said, his voice carrying the flat authority of official pronouncement. We confirm that no written law in Luna Valley's charter addresses the question of partial human lineage in alpha succession. He paused. However, the council has a responsibility not only to the letter of our laws, but to the spirit of them, to the strength and integrity of this pack's leadership, now and into the future. Another pause, longer, preparing the audience for something unwelcome. After careful consideration, the council has determined that the position of Alpha requires the full confidence of its people, and that concerns raised today regarding the purity of bloodline in the Alpha role are concerns that this council takes seriously. His eyes did not find Diana's. Therefore, it is the decision of this council that the ceremony will proceed, with Ada Morgan assuming the role of Alpha Queen of Luna Valley. The assembly broke into noise again, louder this time, more divided. Diana heard protest in it, genuine protest. Voices she recognized raised in objection, old Petra's among them. She heard assent, too. She heard confusion and argument and the complicated sound of a community that was not of one mind. She looked at Roland. He was looking at the ground. She looked at the council line. 2 of them met her eyes, and 2 of them didn't. And the ones who didn't told her everything about what had happened in that room, and what Edna had moved through it like a cold current. She breathed and kept the grief inside. She had known deep down that something like this was coming. "I've already been through the blood ritual," Ada said as she walked to receive the crown. She stood before Marin with her back straight and received the formal words, and the crown was placed on her head, and the ceremony that had been Diana's was completed for someone else. Diana watched. Then Ada turned. She turned toward Eli with a directness that made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably, though no one spoke. Diana watched her sister approach the man she loved. Ada stopped in front of Eli. She reached up and took his face in both of her hands, a gesture so deliberate it silenced the section of the crowd nearest to them. And she looked at him, directly, fully, with a strange intensity in her eyes. She saw Eli's expression change. It was subtle, and it was horrible. The focused clarity she associated with his face and the attentiveness, gone away, like a window being cleaned. His gray eyes, which had been following Diana with concern and confusion, moved to Ada's face and stayed there. Ada lowered her hands. "You're mine," she said to him, low and certain, not performing it for the crowd, but not hiding it either. "You've always been mine." Then she kissed him, open-mouthed and claiming, a kiss that was not an expression of affection, but a declaration of ownership, placed on him in front of the entire assembled pack. He did not pull away. Diana looked at his face when Ada released him. He looked emptied of the particular quality that made him himself. She understood something in that moment, fast and cold and complete, that she must have not really known Eli. Eli was standing beside Ada with a crown on Ada's head, and the entire pack assembled around them, and the future she had understood as plainly as weather was rewriting itself in the space of 20 minutes. Aldrich would not go back on the merger. She knew this. She had heard enough of his nature from Eli and from her father to know that Aldrich was a man who followed interest, not sentiment, and the interest was in the merger, and the merger no longer required Diana. Ada was Alpha Queen now. The merger would proceed. Eli would be made to follow. She would not cry, not here, not in this clearing, not in front of Edna's cold smile, and Ada's borrowed crown, and the council that had looked at the ground rather than at her face. She would not give any of them that. The grief was there, and it was real, and it was hers, and she would take it somewhere private. She turned and walked through the crowd, with her head up, and her father's ring on her right hand. People moved aside for her. Some of them reached for her, Petra's voice behind her saying her name, young Cass standing rigid with bright, furious eyes, and she received none of it right now, because if she received it she would break, and she could not break there. She walked out of the ceremonial ground and up the slope through the village and into the estate, and she did not look back once. Her room took her 4 minutes to manage. She did not pack carefully. She took what mattered, the journal from the cedar chest, the photograph, changes of clothes, her knife, axe, flint, boots, and her belt, and the small amount of packed currency she kept in the drawer of her nightstand. She paused once at the door. She looked back at the room she had grown up in. The cedar chest, the window with its view of the valley, the hook on the wall where her jacket lived. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she went down the back stairs and out through the kitchen and across the yard and through the gate at the back of the property and into the forest. She didn't take the trails. She moved through the trees directly, heading north and east toward the part of the forest she knew better than she knew anything. The deep part, the old part, the part she mapped as a teenager and never stopped returning to. Her mother's cabin, abandoned, standing still in the deep woods, because things her father had built or kept or loved tended to stand. She walked and the pack fell behind her, and the trees closed around her, and the village sounds faded, and eventually there was nothing but forest and her own footsteps, and the cold, clean smell of impending snow. She didn't cry until she was deep enough into the trees that no one could hear her. Then she stopped walking and put her back against a hemlock, and slid down it until she was sitting on the forest floor, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, and she let herself have 5 minutes. 5 minutes of being completely undone, of allowing the grief to do what grief does when it is finally given room. The grief of the lost title, the lost future, the lost pack, and underneath all of that, deeper and more personal and more painful than any of it, the grief of losing her father, and then watching Eli's go smooth and empty while another woman's lips kissed his. 5 minutes, she counted them. Then she stood up, she wiped her face, she put her shoulders back, she walked north. The cabin was waiting. Chapter 7. She almost missed it in the dark. She had been walking for the better part of 4 hours, the forest deepening around her, as she moved further from Luna Valley. A dark shape set back from a natural clearing, still, half swallowed by undergrowth that had crept up the sides and begun working on the roof. But Moon's forest cabin was still standing. She crossed the clearing and put her hand on the door. The wood was weathered gray, the grain raised by years of wet and dry and wet again, but the door was solid. The frame had held. She pushed it open and went inside. It was cold, dark, and smelled of old wood and earth, and something faintly herbal that she thought might be the ghost of whatever had grown in the window boxes at some point, now long dried to dust. There was a stone fireplace on the north wall that looked structurally sound, a narrow bed frame with no mattress, a table and 2 chairs, one of which had a cracked leg, a set of shelves along the east wall, empty, a small kitchen area with a stone basin and space for cooking, a single window on each wall, one of them with a cracked pane that had let in enough weather over the years to warp the floorboards beneath it slightly. She stood in the middle of it and turned slowly, taking inventory the way her father had taught her to take inventory, without judgment, simply cataloging what was and what was needed and what could be made to work. It could be made to work. She went back outside and gathered wood before the last of the light was completely gone, and she built a fire, and she sat beside it on the floor with her back against the wall, and ate the dried provisions she had packed, and listened to the forest settle into its nighttime register around her. She did not think about the clearing. She did not think about Ada kissing Eli, or Roland's face turned toward the ground. She thought about the cracked window pane and whether she could repair it with sap resin and flat stone. And she thought about the bed frame and what she could fill a mattress casing with if she could find or make one. And she thought about the roof, which needed checking in the morning light. She thought about practical things until she fell asleep on the floor beside the fire, and if she dreamed, she did not remember it. The first snow came 3 days after she arrived. She woke to a changed quality of light through the windows, the particular flat white luminescence of a sky with snow in it, and went to the door and opened it, and found the clearing blanketed, the trees around it carrying white on every horizontal surface. The snow was coming down in large, soft flakes. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment. Then she went back inside and got to work, because snow meant cold, and cold meant she did not have the luxury of grief today. The first week was the hardest. She repaired the cracked window first, spending the better part of the day on a solution that involved heated pine resin and a piece of the flat rock she found at the creek bed, which worked adequately and held against the cold. She sealed the gaps of the cabin walls where the chinking had fallen away, using a mixture of clay and moss and dried grass that she remembered from a winter survival lesson Gareth had conducted years ago, pressed deep and flat. She rehung the door on its hinges so it closed fully without lifting. She patched the section of roof where a branch had fallen and cracked 2 boards, climbing up in the cold with her jaw set and her fingers going numb, and fixing it because the alternative was snow on everything she owned. She found a mattress solution in the form of a large canvas sack from the cabin storage shelf, sturdy enough if she stuffed it. She spent 2 days collecting dry moss and pine needles and the inner bark fibers of birch trees, and packing the sack until it was dense enough to sleep on, which it almost was. which improved with a second round of stuffing. She slept on it and was grateful. She built the shelves up from empty, the things she needed appearing slowly, gathered or made or traded for on a single careful trip to the edge of the outermost village. A small settlement called Millhaven, a 2-hour walk from the cabin where she was not known and asked no questions, and was asked none. She came back with dried stables and 2 good knives, and a clay pot for cooking and seeds, because seeds were the thing she needed most, and the thing that mattered longest. The seeds she tended indoors through the worst of the winter. She had no greenhouse and no grow frame, but she had the south-facing window which got the best light, and she had the clay pot she fashioned from the creek bed clay and fired at the edge of the fireplace, and she had the knowledge her father had insisted she accumulate, which plants could be coaxed through winter indoors with enough light and attention. She planted what she could, herbs first, then the hardier greens, then the root vegetables in the deepest pots she set near the fire. The window sill became a crowded, determined little garden, green against the white outside the glass, and she tended it every morning before she did anything else, checking the soil and rotating the pots toward the light. The hunting she was good at. She'd always been good at it. Hector had taught her young, and Gareth had refined it, and the wolf in her knew the forest instinctively and deeply. She went out in the early mornings and hunted in wolf form, and sometimes in human form, with her bow, moving through the snow-covered woods with a stillness that came naturally to both halves of her. The wolf side's silence and the human side's patience working together in a way she had never thought much about, but now had reason to appreciate. She ate well and she kept herself strong. She was surviving. On a morning in the second week, she opened the cabin door to assess the overnight snowfall and nearly stepped on a cat. It was sitting on the top step, unimpressed by how long it had been made to wait. It was entirely black, with no variation whatsoever. Its eyes were vivid amber, and that looked almost orange in the morning light. It was sleek, and it was medium-sized, and it was looking at Diana like it had already decided something, and was simply waiting for the relevant human to catch up. Diana looked at it. It looked at her. "No," Diana said. The cat blinked slowly. "I don't—" She stopped, restarted. "I'm a wolf. You understand that. You should be running." The cat turned its head very slightly to one side, as though considering this information and finding it unpersuasive. Then it stood stretched with complete unhurried luxury, front paws extended, spine arching, tail curling, and walked directly between Diana's feet and into the cabin. Diana turned around. The cat was already sitting beside the fireplace, washing its face with one paw. The wolf side of her produced a feeling of slight biological wrongness at the presence of a cat in her space. The two species carrying between them some ancient and mutual weariness that didn't require thought, just arrived. She noticed the feeling. She also noticed the cat, which was now washing its ears with serene confidence, never once doubting its welcome. "That's my fire," Diana said. The cat ignored her with a completeness that was almost impressive. She stood in the doorway for another moment. Then she went inside because it was cold, and she closed the door. And she stepped around the cat to put more wood on the fire, and the cat moved 2 inches to accommodate her, and then moved back. She named it Luna before she had finished making her morning tea. She was not sure why she bothered resisting. The human side of her was amused by the cat, and liked the idea of not completely being alone. Luna settled into the cabin and claimed the spot before the fireplace as primary residence, with secondary territories established on the left side of the mattress, the middle shelf of the storage rack, and the other chair with the repaired leg, which it seemed to prefer precisely in proportion to how much Diana wanted to sit in it. The wolf side of Diana maintained a low level of ambient objection to the cat's presence that never quite resolved. The wolf in her recognized grudgingly that Luna was not prey and not a threat. What it produced was a persistent mild friction that showed up in specific ways. The slight involuntary tension when Luna brushed against her legs unexpectedly, the half-second of wolf alertness when the cat made a sudden movement, the vague sense of category violation when she looked up from the fire and found a pair of amber eyes looking back at her from the darkness. The human side of her found the cat completely hilarious. There was the morning Luna discovered the indoor seed pots, approached them with apparent scientific interest, sniffed each one systematically, and then sat squarely in front of the south window and refused to move, blocking approximately 2/3 of the available light for what appeared to be no reason other than the spot was warm. Diana relocated 4 pots around the cat, which did not acknowledge this operation in any way. There was the afternoon Diana came back from a hunt to find Luna sitting on the table in the center of the dried herbs she had been sorting for the past hour, wearing the expression of a creature that was technically not doing anything wrong, and was prepared to defend this position philosophically. There was the evening she set her bow against the wall and turned around to find Luna engaged in an intense staring contest with her own reflection in the dark window, tail lashing, fully committed to what appeared to be a personal conflict of significant magnitude. "She's not real," Diana told her. Luna glanced at her briefly with an expression that suggested this was exactly the kind of unhelpful commentary she had come to expect, and then returned to the conflict. Diana laughed. It surprised her. The laugh arrived before she could think about it, short and genuine, and it sat in the cabin for a moment after it happened like a small, warm thing. She looked at it from the inside and realized it was the first time she had laughed since before the coronation, since before her father's death, perhaps. She couldn't immediately locate the last time before this one. It had been 3 weeks since she came to live in the cabin. She found a rhythm and kept to it. The morning garden check, the hunting, the maintenance work that a structure in the deep woods always generated, the evenings by the fire with the tasks that could be done by firelight. She learned the specific sounds of this section of the forest, cataloging what was normal, until the normal was so well established that anything outside it registered immediately. She knew the owl that hunted in the eastern clearing and the fox family whose den she had located 200 meters north, and the way the wind moved through the particular stand of hemlocks behind the cabin differently than it moved through the birch further up the ridge. She did not visit Luna Valley. She did not send word. She did not know if anyone was looking for her, and chose, for now, not to find out. She thought about her father, and about what he had given her, and what he had not been able to protect her from. The grief for him was different from the grief for everything else. It was older and cleaner in some ways. Grief for something irreplaceable but natural. The loss of a parent, the thing the world expected you to eventually be able to carry. She was learning to carry it. She thought about Eli as little as she could manage, which was not as little as she would have liked. She was careful about this. She gave herself the same approach she gave the grief for her father. Measured doses, controlled exposure, deliberate rather than accidental. When she found herself thinking about him, she permitted it briefly and then moved her attention back to something practical. The seed pots, the next day's hunt route, the cabin roof, and whether the south section needed reinforcement before the spring thaw created runoff. What she could not entirely prevent was the specific image that came about without warning at odd moments. Eli's face in the ceremonial clearing, the moment before Ada's hands took his face, when his gray eyes had been following Diana with concern, and something desperate underneath the concern, something that had looked like a man watching something he could not stop, and knowing it. She thought that image might have been real. She also thought it was possible that she had reconstructed it to comfort herself. She could not be certain which was true, and the uncertainty was its own particular kind of grief, small and persistent and sharp at the edges. She didn't let herself stay in it. She turned the seed pots toward the light. She watched Luna stage elaborate solo hunts of shadows and pine needles, in one memorable 40-minute campaign against a piece of dried grass that had blown under the door. She was surviving. She was doing it well. It was almost enough. Outside, the winter held the valley in its long, cold hands, and inside the cabin the fire burned, and Diana sat in the light of it, surviving, stubborn, her father's daughter, and her mother's too. Both halves. All of her. Chapter 8. The hare's trail went north along the creek bed, then cut east through the stand of young birch, where the undergrowth thinned and the snow lay undisturbed, except for the small tracks. Diana followed it in wolf form, low and unhurried, her nose reading the story of the animal's morning, where it had paused, where it had startled at something, where it had doubled back once, before committing to the eastern direction. She had come to love hunting in winter. There was a clarity to it that the other seasons didn't quite match. the world stripped to its essentials, the snow preserving every record, nothing obscured. The hair scent strengthened as she curved around a fallen spruce. She slowed. Then she stopped entirely. Beneath the hair scent, beneath the spruce and the creek, and the cold mineral smell of new snow, there was something else. Wolf. It was recent, hours at most. She shifted her head and turned slowly, reading direction. The scent was coming from the northwest. A single wolf, adult male. She stood very still in the snow for a long moment. Her wolf side processed the information without alarm. No aggression markers in the scent, no territorial warning, none of the chemical signals that preceded a challenge or an attack. Whatever wolf had moved through had not been moving with hostile intent. But it had been moving, and had been close to the cabin, and she had not heard it and not smelled it until now. She abandoned the hare's trail and turned back toward the cabin, moving faster now, her nose working in the air steadily as she went. She came through the tree line into the clearing and stopped at the cabin's edge and put her nose to the ground and read the perimeter carefully, moving in a wide, methodical circle. But the trail led away, back north and west into the deep forest. She shifted at the cabin door and stood in the snow in her human shape, looking at the hemlock stand. Gone, whatever it was, whoever it was, they had gone. She hurried inside, put her clothes on, and put more wood on the fire, and stood before it for several minutes warming up. Then she made tea and sat at the table, and looked out the window and thought. It could be any wolf, a lone wolf moving through the territory, curious about the cabin's smoke, a young male from some pack she didn't know, ranging out from its home territory the way the young wolves sometimes did. It did not need to be anything more than that. She turned her seed pots toward the light, and fed Luna, and went about her day, but she kept the knife on her belt for the rest of it. The storm announced itself in the late afternoon. She had noticed the sky changing at midday, the clouds building in from the northwest. By mid-afternoon the light had gone, the flat gray-yellow that preceded serious snowfall, and the temperature had dropped enough that she could feel it through the cabin walls. The wind began shortly after. She looked at the storm through the window, and then looked at the wood supply and put her heaviest layer on, and her boots. When she opened the door, the wind hit her immediately. The wood store was stacked at the side of the cabin. She had built it up over the weeks, cutting and splitting on dry days. It was not far, 20 feet perhaps. In reasonable weather it was a 30-second trip. In this, with the snow coming nearly horizontal, the visibility already dropping, and the wind, it seemed a lot farther. She went out. The first trip was manageable. She loaded her arms full and came back and stacked the wood and went out again. The second trip was harder. The wind had picked up, and the snow was coming so thickly now that the tree line had become a gray blur. She loaded up and came back. The third trip, she was going to need at least 2 more to be safe through tomorrow. She was 6 steps from the woodpile on the 4th trip when she heard it. A sound that cut through the wind, a deep splintering crack from above and to her right. She had heard it before, enough times in the winter woods to know what it meant, but there was no time. Something massive and dark dropped through the white. She did not feel the impact. What she felt was sudden forceful presence of something large hitting her from the left side. Not the tree, something warm and solid and alive that connected with her hip and shoulder simultaneously and drove her sideways through the snow with considerable momentum. And she went down hard, with that warm solid thing covering her, as the tree hit the ground where she had been standing, with a concussive crash that she felt through the snow and the frozen ground beneath it. She was on her back in the snow, with her heart hammering and her hip aching from the landing. She became aware, in the receding rush of her own adrenaline, that the weight that had driven her clear was still present. Beside her now, a large wolf, dark-coated and breathing hard, its flank against her arm. She looked at it. It looked back at her with gray eyes. She went absolutely still. The wolf held her gaze for one long moment, then it shifted so Diana could recognize him. The shift was smooth and practiced, the movement of someone who had been shifting for years without thinking about it. And then Eli was kneeling in the snow beside her, breathing hard, his dark hair immediately white with snowfall, wearing the look of a man who had just saved her life and wearing nothing at all. For a moment neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence between them with its continuous noise. Then Diana sat up. "Get up," she said. She stood up and brushed snow off her coat, and looked at him. She had never seen his wolf before, and recognized his wolf scent as the scent she had smelled in the woods earlier. He stood. He was naked and covered in snow, and he was looking at her with an expression she did not have the capacity to fully examine right now. "Inside," she said, because the storm made standing there dangerous. She turned and went to the door, opened it, and went in. He followed. Snow still clung to him when he crossed the threshold. Eli didn't bother with hesitation. He pushed the cabin door shut against the howling wind and stood there for a second, breath steaming, shoulders dusted in white, entirely and unmistakably naked. The storm had stripped him of everything but himself. Diana turned from the hearth, anger already rising to meet him, and then stopped. For all her fury, for all the words she had been ready to throw at him, her eyes betrayed her for just a fraction too long. She had seen men shift before. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't new. But this was Eli. And that made it different. Her gaze betraying her before she caught herself turning sharply toward a nearby chair. "You're going to freeze," she said, grabbing the thick woven blanket and tossing it at him with a little more force than necessary. "Cover yourself before you collapse on my floor." Eli caught it with a quiet huff, wrapping it around his waist, though the corners of his mouth twitched despite the cold. "Concern for me?" "Concern for my floors," she shot back, gesturing toward the fire. "Sit before you turn into a block of ice." He obeyed, lowering himself near the hearth, stretching his hands toward the flames. The firelight glowed on his skin, warming it slowly, chasing away the last of the storm's bite. Then, his nose wrinkled. "Is that a cat?" Diana blinked, thrown off. "What?" A low, unimpressed meow answered for her. From the far side of the hearth, a sleek black shape stretched, amber eyes narrowing as they fixed on Eli with immediate and unapologetic disdain. Eli leaned back slightly, as if he might distance himself from the offense. "You have a cat?" "Yes," Diana said flatly. "I do." "In here?" "Yes." "In your space?" Diana crossed her arms. "She lives here." Luna seemed entirely unimpressed by Eli. She rose to her feet, stretched with deliberate elegance, and then, with slow and calculated defiance, padded closer to the fire, and settled directly into the warmest spot. Eli stared. "She?" He gestured vaguely. "She just took my place?" Diana pressed her lips together, but a hint of amusement slipped through. "Looks like it." His eyes narrowed slightly at the cat. "I don't like her." Luna blinked at him, slow, deliberate, and then turned her head away. Diana almost smiled. "She doesn't like you either," she said. Eli exhaled, dragging a hand through his damp hair, clearly resisting the urge to react on instinct alone. "I'm choosing not to see her as prey," he said. "You should appreciate the restraint." "I do," Diana replied dryly. "Very noble of you." The tension in the room shifted, not gone, but softened, warmer, until Diana shrugged off her coat. Eli's gaze caught on the movement. There, just beneath her shoulder blade, dark against her skin, blood. His expression changed instantly. "That's not nothing," he said, already pushing himself to his feet, despite the protest of cold still clinging to him. "Turn around." "It's just a scrape." "Diana." The way he said her name, low, firm, threaded with concern, cut clean through her resistance. She hesitated, then slowly turned. The firelight traced the line of the wound, not deep, but raw, where something sharp on her fall had torn through the fabric and skin alike. The sight of it tightened Eli's chest. "You should have said something," he said. "I didn't realize I'd been injured, and besides, you had bigger concerns," she replied quietly, "like not freezing to death." He stepped closer anyway, careful, measured. "Sit," he said more gently this time. She did. For a moment neither spoke. Then Eli reached for a clean cloth near the hearth, dipping it into a basin of water, warmed by the fire. When he touched it to her skin, his movements were slow, deliberate in a way that felt almost reverent. Diana inhaled softly, the sting of the wound dulled by the warmth of his touch. "You saved me," she answered. His hand stilled for a second, then continued. The space between them changed to something deeper than Diana's anger. It was something more dangerous. Eli's fingers brushed lightly along her back as he finished cleaning the wound, his touch careful, but not distant, not detached. Diana's breath caught, just slightly. Neither of them moved away. The fire crackled softly. Snow pressed against the windows, and Luna flicked her tail in clear disapproval, though she didn't leave. Diana snapped out of her amorous trance. "I'll be fine, but you should sit by the fire and warm up." Eli looked down at the fire. "That's my spot," he said to the cat. Luna blinked once, slowly, and looked at the fire. "She doesn't negotiate," Diana said. "I just saved your master from a murderous tree." Luna's tail moved a single inch to the left and returned. This appeared to be her complete response to his credentials. Eli looked at Diana with an expression that was asking for some form of intervention, or at minimum solidarity. Diana sat down on the floor on the other side of the fireplace and said nothing, because watching Eli, wrapped in a wool blanket, standing in a standoff with a cat in a blizzard in the middle of the deep woods, was the first genuinely amusing thing that had happened to her in almost a month, and she was not going to interrupt it. He lowered himself to the floor and sat with his back against the wall, approximately 8 inches from Luna's chair. Luna turned her head and regarded him from above, and made peace with a minor inconvenience. "She's looking at me," Eli said. "She looks at everything." "It's aggressive." "She's a cat." "It's an aggressive cat." But he didn't move away, and he didn't do the thing his wolf was clearly suggesting. Diana noted his restraint and filed it without comment, but then remembered all that had happened before she left Luna Valley. "You should leave," she said. "I know you think that—" "It's not a thought, Eli. It's a sentence. It means the thing it says." "I know." He didn't move toward the door. "I'm not going to. Not until you've heard me." The fire popped. Outside, the storm pressed against the walls with renewed emphasis, the wind finding every gap and testing it. "You have until this storm breaks," she said. "Then you leave." He nodded. "That's fair." "It's not fair. It's what's available." She sat down on the floor by the fire because she was cold, and her hip ached, and she was not going to give him the only chair that didn't have a cat in it. She pulled her knees up and looked at him. "Talk." He sat on the floor across from her, which she hadn't expected, and which she assigned no meaning to. He leaned his forearms on his knees and looked at the fire for a moment, and she recognized the look, the gathering of words that he did before he said something that mattered. "I don't know entirely what happened at the ceremony," he said. "I've been trying to reconstruct it, and there are parts I can't reach." He paused. "When Ada came toward me, I remember her face clearly, and I remember her hands, and then there's a section that isn't quite... It's like when you've slept too hard, and the first few minutes after walking don't fully belong to you. I was there, and then I was less there. And then she kissed me, and He stopped. "I want you to know that I didn't choose any of that." Diana looked at the fire. "After she kissed me and you left, I left. I went to my father's accommodations, and I told him I knew that now he wanted me to marry Ada, and that I was not going to marry her, that the terms of the merger had to be renegotiated. I told him that I would support a merger between the packs in a different capacity, but I would not do it through a marriage I was not consenting to." "And your father?" Diana said. Eli was quiet for a moment. "My father is not a flexible man. You know that." He looked at his hands. "He and Edna have been in communication. The merger serves both of them, and they have decided between themselves that it goes forward as arranged." He paused. "My father told me that the pack merger is bigger than my personal preferences, and that I would do my duty." "And will you?" He looked at her directly. "I'm here, Diana. After the conversation with my father, I went to your room, but you weren't there, and you never returned." The fire moved. Luna shifted position on the chair with the complaining sound she produced when she had not been consulted about something, and felt this fire oversight should be noted. "The pack," Eli said. "Most of them, not all of them, but most, think it was wrong. What the council did, not just questionable, wrong. They acted without a proper vote, without the formal deliberation the pack charter requires for a succession decision." He held her gaze. "There are people in Luna Valley who want to challenge it." "On what grounds?" "Procedural first. The charter requires a full council vote with a minimum of 5 days' deliberation for any succession change. Roland bypassed that entirely." He paused. "And there are council members who are not comfortable with how the decision was made. I have spoken to 2 of them." Diana looked at him. "Who spoke to you?" "Marin," he said simply. She breathed in slowly. "She found me a week after you left. She came to where I was staying outside the valley, and she told me what she knew, and she told me where I might find you." He paused. "She said your father trusted her to do what was necessary." The warmth in Diana's chest moved. She had not felt it this strongly since Marin's cottage, the thing she still had no name for, stirring now as though something had nudged it awake. She looked at Eli, and her logical brain told her not to believe him so easily. But as she looked at him, something else happened. She felt pressure, the way weather had pressure. It was coming from him, but the words he was saying and the way he was sitting in that particular quality of his stillness, and it was pressing against the inside of her chest with the same warmth as the thing Marin had put there, and it was telling her something she did not have a clean word for yet. He was telling the truth. It was an absolute knowing. She went very still. She thought about the ceremony, Ada kissing Eli, and him claiming to not know what happened. That would otherwise be hard to believe. She thought about Marin's voice. The door opens. What comes through depends on what was always in you. The warmth moved through her chest again as she realized lie detection was one of her alpha abilities. That was the first time she had a chance to use it since being isolated. She closed her eyes briefly and opened them. "You want me to come back," she said. "I want you to fight for what's yours." He held her gaze. "You are the rightful Alpha of Luna Valley. Your father prepared you for 20 years. The ritual was complete." He paused, and something moved through his expression. Careful, significant. "Marin told me that too. Whatever else Ada may have done, whatever she may have taken, the rite was completed, Diana. What you received that night belongs to you, and it can't be undone." Diana sat with everything he had said. She sat with the knowing that lived in her chest, and the warmth that confirmed it, and the grief that still sat underneath. "I don't know if I want it," she said. "The title, the pack, all of it." She paused. "I did, and then they took it, and I'm not sure if what I feel now is real, or just the aftermath of losing it." "That's fair," he said. "You don't have to decide tonight." "What are you suggesting, then?" He met her eyes. "Let me go back to the valley. I'll talk to the council members who have doubts, look at the charter provisions, and find the procedural grounds. 1 week. Give me 1 week, and I'll come back with something concrete." He paused. "A plan. A real one. You can't leave until the storm lets up," she said. Outside, the blizzard raged, but the cabin suddenly felt warmer. Chapter 9. The blizzard closed in like a living thing. By nightfall, the world beyond the cabin had vanished. Trees swallowed in white, the sky indistinguishable from the ground. Wind howled against the walls, shaking the cabin. Snow packed thick against the door, sealing them inside. There would be no leaving, not for a while. Diana stood by the hearth, feeding another log into the fire, its warmth projecting gold across the small space. Behind her she could feel Eli, his presence impossible to ignore. She made food, she fed Luna, who received her bowl with the critical inspection of a restaurant reviewer before condescending to eat. She banked the fire for the night and checked the wood supply she had managed to bring in before the tree had nearly done her in. Eli helped her without being asked. He brought the remaining wood in during the brief lull, wearing just a blanket and coming back covered in snow and saying nothing about it. They ate by the fire with Luna arranged between them like a small, opinionated buffer, eating with great dignity and then washing her face and then falling asleep as though the entire matter of 2 wolves in a blizzard was profoundly beneath her notice. They talked for a while the way they talked in the early months of knowing each other, moving through subjects naturally, one leading to another. She had forgotten how easy it was, how specifically easy it was with him. In a way it wasn't easy with most people. She had always felt comfortable in her own silence. She had not expected to find someone whose company felt as easy as her own silence did. The first night stretched long and quiet. She went to bed on her side of the room, and he took the floor near the fire and said goodnight the way he said everything, simply and without performance. And she lay in the dark, listening to the blizzard work against the walls, and told herself firmly and specifically to go to sleep. But the storm demanded shared warmth and space. It was too cold for either of them to be very far away from the fire. Eli remained near the fire, and he invited her to sleep near him, to stay warm. The blanket was loosely wrapped around him, though it did little to hide the steady rise and fall of his chest, the heat of him contrasting the cold pressing in from all sides. Diana tried not to notice as she cozied up near him, but she failed as she fell asleep in his warmth. By the second day, she couldn't get the thought of being that close to him off her mind, while trying to do the things they needed to do to survive. "You're staring," Eli said, without looking up. "I am not." "You are." She exhaled, crossing her arms. "You're insufferable. And yet you haven't asked me to leave." She held his gaze. "There's a blizzard, Eli." "Convenient." Slowly and inevitably, the space between them, once filled with misunderstanding, began to dissolve under the weight of shared warmth and quiet truth. A brush of hands lingered longer than it should have. A glance held just a second too long. "You still don't believe me," he said. Her chest tightened. "I believe what I saw, and I'm telling you it wasn't what you think." She searched his face, and this time she didn't just look, she felt. Her newly discovered lie detection ability was instinctive and deeper than thought. It stirred beneath her skin, responding to the truth in his voice and the absence of deception. He wasn't lying. But confusion had settled in because she had seen Ada kiss him, and he had done nothing to stop her. "I don't understand," she admitted. "Let me prove it to you," he said, stepping closer. The distance between them disappeared. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. His fingers brushed along her jaw, warm and careful. Diana leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. That was all it took. He kissed her, and something deeper took over. Weeks of tension, of longing, of almost and what-ifs unraveled all at once, pulling them closer, erasing the space between them completely. Diana's hands found him, her fingers curling lightly against his shoulders as she gave in to him. The warmth between them grew, chasing away the cold that had settled into her bones long before the storm arrived. "I love you," he said. The words settled into her. Her alpha power stirred again, testing him. He was telling the truth. Something inside her softened. "I love you too," she whispered. And she did, even if she didn't understand everything else. She at least knew that. Outside, the storm raged. By the third day, the storm began to fade, and sunlight finally filtered through the frost-covered windows. Reality sunk in. Eli stood near the door once more, though his gaze lingered on her like he hadn't quite decided to leave yet. "I have to go back," he said. Diana nodded, though something in her chest tightened. "I know." "I'll return to Luna Valley," he continued. "I'll dig through everything, laws, records, council rulings. There has to be some way I can get Ada's coronation overturned." "And if there isn't?" she asked quietly. "Then I'll make them listen anyway." A small breath left her. "I'll come back in a week with a plan." "And Diana," his voice softened, "I meant what I said." Her eyes lifted to his. "I want to marry you," he said plainly, "whether you're an alpha queen or not." The words landed deeper this time, because now she knew she could believe him. He stepped closer one last time and kissed her softly on the lips. Then he turned, dropped the blanket, and shifted out into the quiet, snow-covered world. A week passed. Diana had filled her days with work, hunting, repairing, tending to the land, and tending to Luna. Waiting, but this time it didn't feel like before. This time she had something real to hold on to, and expected Eli to show up any moment with a plan. Then 2 more days passed with no Eli, and she began to worry. The quiet stretched longer, and the path outside remained untouched. There was no sign of him. Diana stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, and she stared out into the stillness. "He said he'd come back in a week. Something's wrong," she told Luna. Luna rubbed up against her leg. Slowly, doubt began to creep in. Chapter 10. Diana put the fire out and told Luna she would be back soon. She shifted and ran as hard and fast as she could to Luna Valley. She shifted again and moved in human form through the outer edge of the settlement, using the tree line for cover until she had to leave it, then moving low and quick along the back side of the storage buildings that bordered the northern property line of Morgan Estate. She came to the back of the main house and looked up at the second floor. She would have to climb naked if she wanted clothes. Her window was latched from the inside, but the latch had been loose since she was 14 years old. She found the right angle of pressure on the frame, and the latch gave the way it always had, and she eased the window up and climbed through with the practiced efficiency of 2 decades of practice, and was inside her room in under 30 seconds. She had hoped it still looked the same, and it did. She stood in it for a moment and allowed herself exactly that, a moment, and then she went to the wardrobe and put on clothes. Her own clothes, the ones she knew and moved well in. Dark trousers, a fitted long-sleeve shirt, a warm coat, and her worn boots, that she left behind in her rush when she grabbed her traveling pair. She strapped her knife to her belt. She was back out the window in 4 minutes. She smelled them before she saw them. She was moving through the western side of the village, keeping to the gaps between the buildings, when the wind shifted and brought her Eli's mixed scent with Ada's, and the sound of the pack moving around them in a particular configuration of a public occasion, arranged, attentive, the sound of a community performing its normalcy for a leadership that required the performance. She followed the scent to the main road. They were coming from the direction of the communal hall, Ada in front, dressed in her Alpha's colors, her dark hair arranged, her posture carrying the easy confidence of someone who has decided she belongs, and had begun to believe it. Eli walked beside her with his hands loose at his sides, and his gray eyes on the middle distance, seeing nothing in particular, which was the detail that drove everything else from Diana's mind the moment she registered it. She pressed herself into the gap between two buildings and watched. He walked beside Ada, present in body, but seemingly absent from it at the same time. The mechanics correct, the posture right, the movement normal, but his eyes were glazed over, in the way she had seen at the coronation. Ada leaned up and kissed him on the cheek as they walked, a proprietary gesture staged for the pack members watching from their doorways and their gardens. And Diana's hands pressed flat against the building behind her, and she was about to turn away when she heard Eli say to Ada, "I love you, Diana." She went absolutely still. Ada had not heard it. Ada was already looking the other way, acknowledging someone in the crowd, with the gracious nod she had apparently been practicing. No one else appeared to have caught it, but Diana heard it, coming from Eli, addressed to Ada's retreating profile as she turned away from him. He had called Ada Diana. He thought she was Diana. She stood in the gap between the buildings and let this information reorganize everything in her mind. Ada had gone through a blood moon ritual before her false coronation. She must have gained hypnotism as her alpha power. Ada had not simply blunted Eli's resistance or redirected his attention. She had replaced what he saw. He was looking at Ada and seeing Diana. He must have done something similar to Roland and some council members, which was why Edna's influence had landed so thoroughly, why reasonable men had made an unreasonable decision, with the glazed efficiency of people not fully operating under their own volition. And she had done all of it with an alpha power she had taken through a ritual she should not have been given access to, that she had stolen the way she had tried to steal everything else. Diana stepped out from between the buildings. She walked into the road with her shoulders level, and her father's ring on her right hand, and her knife on her belt, and the certainty in her chest. The pack members who saw her first went still in a wave, a rippling quiet moving out from under her position through the watching crowd, heads turning, hands stopping their work. She heard Petra make a sound from somewhere to her left, and ignored it for a moment. She looked at Ada. Ada had turned at the silence. Her composed expression held for exactly 2 seconds when she registered Diana, long enough to confirm that she'd expected this and prepared for it. "Diana." Her voice was pleasant, publicly pleasant. "You look—" She glanced at Diana's clothes. "Well, given everything." "Ada." Diana looked past her at Eli. He was standing 2 feet behind Ada with his eyes on the middle distance, not tracking the exchange, not reading the crowd's energy, not doing any of the things he would be doing if he were himself. His expression was patient and empty. It was the most wrong she had ever seen him look, and the sight of it moved through her like a cold current. "What did you do to him?" Diana said. "He's perfectly fine." Ada's voice stayed pleasant. "He's happy, actually, happier than you ever made him." The warmth in Diana's chest told her this was a lie. "He's standing there like he isn't in his own body," Diana said. "That's not happiness. That's something you did." Ada tilted her head. "He chose me. He chose his alpha queen." "Lie." The warmth was immediate and specific. "You're lying," Diana said, without emphasis. "A statement of fact. And you know you're lying, which means you're performing for the crowd." She looked at the pack members standing in their doorways and their gardens, and at the sides of the road, watching with careful attention of people who are very interested, and trying to appear merely curious. "He called you Diana," she said, to the crowd as much as to Ada. "I heard it. He thinks you're me." Ada's jaw tightened. "What's your alpha power, Ada?" Diana asked. Something moved behind Ada's eyes, fast and involuntary, while calibrating how to manage it. I don't know what you're... Yes, you do. Diana looked at her steadily and let the warmth read what was underneath the performance. It's hypnotism, some form of it. You look at someone and you overwrite what they see, what they feel, what they believe. She paused. That's how you took the council. Not just Edna's bribery. You were in that room, Ada. I saw you go in, and they came out like men who had made a decision they didn't fully remember making. She looked at Eli. And that's what you did to him. He's completely out of it, and you must have given it all you had in you to make him this far gone. You didn't make him love you. You couldn't. So you made him see me when he looks at you. The crowd was very quiet. You always got everything, Ada said, quietly. Not for the crowd now. Every single thing without trying, without having to fight for any of it. He looked at you like you'd invented sunlight. That's not my fault, Diana said, just as quietly. No, Ada's voice cracked across the middle of the word and sealed itself back up. But it's also not my fault that I exist, that I was born into this family and spent my entire life watching you stand in the center of it while I stood at the edge. I know, Diana said, and she meant it. She understood that Ada's hatred had its own logic. I know that's what it felt like, and I know it wasn't fair. But Ada, she held her sister's gaze, you were never at the edge because I put you there. You were there because Edna built a wall between you and your father, and told you I was the reason for it. And that's Edna's doing, not mine. She paused. And you took a title that wasn't yours, and a man that isn't yours, and a power you stole access to. And you used all of it to build a life made entirely out of things that belong to other people. And that's not power. It's the most elaborate kind of fear I've ever seen dressed up as confidence. Ada's face changed. The composure left it all at once, stripped clean by the truth of what Diana had said, and what was underneath was something raw and furious. You don't get to stand here, Ada said, and her voice had gone to a register Diana had never heard in it before, stripped of the pleasantness and the performance. You lost, you ran, you don't get to come back here and... I didn't run, Diana said. I stepped back, there's a difference. Ada shifted. There was no warning, no formal challenge, just the sudden explosive movement of Ada shifting to her wolf, which Diana registered and responded to before it was complete. She stepped back and to the left with fluid economy. Her skill and ability reflected that she had trained with Gareth for years. Ada's wolf landed where Diana had been standing, and it was furious, which Diana could read in the set of the shoulders and the lay of the ears and the forward positioning of the weight. Diana did not shift. She knew Ada lacked in the training and discipline department. Diana's highly skilled human form could easily take Ada's wolf on. Ada's wolf came at her fast. The attack of a wolf who has power and anger and is using the first to deliver the second, which was exactly as manageable as Diana had thought. She moved to the right and used the wolf's own momentum, deflecting rather than blocking. Ada's wolf hit the ground, scrambled, but was up fast, faster than Diana had given her credit for. She came again. The fight was not elegant. Diana felt her skin rip as she took a swipe from the forearm from Ada's claw. She used the ground twice in ways that got snow and mud in her hair. But she was not fighting to beat Ada's wolf. She was fighting to outlast Ada's fury, which was an achievable goal. Ada, for all her power, had never trained with the commitment Diana had. It took 7 minutes. At the end of those 7 minutes, Ada's wolf was on the ground, winded and held there by Diana's weight, and the specific joint configuration that Gareth had drilled into her until it was a reflex. A hold that said, "This is over, and you know it." Ada's wolf went still. Diana held the position for 10 seconds, feeling the resistance go out of the body beneath her, and then she stood up and stepped back, and Ada shifted back to human form in the mud and the snow, gasping and laying there looking up at the sky, having spent all she had. Diana looked down at her sister for a moment. "Stay down," she commanded. She turned. Eli was standing in the road. His eyes were normal, and he was looking at Diana as he reoriented himself. Ada had spent all of her energy and could no longer keep anyone hypnotized. He looked around at the road and the crowd, and Ada in the mud, and his face moved through several things rapidly. What the... The bell hit before he could finish. It was the bell that sat in the tower at the eastern edge of the village, and had not been rung in over a decade. The one whose specific pitch and rhythm Diana had known since childhood. The one that meant only one thing: attack. The sound hit the village like a stone hitting water. the ripple of it moving outward through the crowd instantly, bodies shifting, faces changing, the pack transforming in the space of a bell toll from a community watching a confrontation to a community preparing for war. She heard the eastern sentries, the urgent howls coming in fast from the boundary. She looked at Eli. He was already himself again. The confusion was gone, and his eyes were sharp and present, and reading the same information she was reading. Dusk fell, he said. Clay, she said. A third howl from the eastern boundary, closer than the second. Behind them, Ada was on her feet. Diana turned and looked at her. She had expected the fury of before, but the expression of, "You're so tough, you handle it," had settled on Ada's face. Ada turned and walked toward the Alpha cabin, quickly, without a word, and the door closed behind her. Diana looked at the closed door for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the road and at the pack members moving into their emergency configurations. The fighters to the east, the vulnerable to the interior, the older wolves moving the children with the practiced speed of people who had run this drill. She looked at Eli, who was already scanning the eastern approach with the focused attention of an Alpha Prince, assessing tactical information. The people were standing in the road looking to her. Old Petra and young Cass and the faces she had known her whole life, looking at her the way they had not looked at Ada in the seconds since the bell rang, looking at her. She shifted, the wolf rising up through her without hesitation. Beside her, Eli shifted, his dark wolf large and ready beside hers. She hit the eastern road at full run. Behind her, she heard Luna Valley wolves coming, the fighters, the trained ones, the ones who had looked at her in the road and made a decision. For now there was only the road and the tree line where Clay was coming. She ran toward it. Chapter 11. Diana stood at the edge of the clearing, her pulse racing. "They're here," Eli said beside her, already shifting his stance, his body coiling with readiness. Across the valley, shadows moved between the trees. Not theirs, too many, too fast. A second howl answered the first, lower, crueler. Clay, of Duskfell. The name alone carried weight. Clay's use of poison on the claws killed her father. Diana's jaw tightened. "Tonight ends it," she said. Eli glanced at her, something fierce and certain in his expression. The shift tore through her like fire. Bones crackled and reshaped, muscle coiling and expanding, senses exploding outward into the night. Her wolf surged forward, stronger than it had ever before. Fully awake, fully hers, with no hesitation. Power flooded her veins, wild and electric beneath her skin. The enemy struck first. Duskfell wolves burst from the tree line like a wave of teeth and shadow, slamming into Luna Valley's defenses with savage force. Snarls and screams tore through the night as bodies collided, fur and blood and bone, in a violent storm. Diana didn't wait. She launched forward, faster than thought and fear, her wolf a streak of dark power cutting straight into the heart of the fight. The first wolf never saw her coming. She hit him mid-lunge, her jaws closing hard around his throat, momentum driving them both to the ground. Bone snapped beneath her bite. Blood flooded her mouth. She didn't stop. Another came from the side. She twisted, claws raking deep across its flank, tearing through muscle as it yelped and fell back. A third leapt. She met it head-on. The impact shook the ground. Teeth clashed. She drove forward, overpowering, relentless, her strength surging with something deeper than instinct alone. Across the battlefield, Eli fought like a force of nature. His wolf was larger than most, his movements precise and deadly. He tore through Duskfell's ranks, guarding the pack, pushing them back with brutal efficiency, but always staying within reach of her, watching, fighting beside her. A roar cut through the chaos. Everything stilled for a fraction of a second. Then he stepped forward. Clay. Larger than any wolf Diana had ever seen. His coat dark as storm clouds, his eyes burning with savage intelligence. Scars marked his body, proof of battles won, lives taken. And he was smiling. "You finally show your teeth." His voice seemed to echo even without words, carried in the low rumble of his growl. Diana stepped forward to meet him. The world narrowed. There was only him, and her. He struck first, faster than she expected for his size. She barely twisted in time, his claws slicing across her shoulder instead of her throat. Pain flared, but she used it, pivoting, driving her weight into him, forcing him back a step. He recovered instantly. He had used his claws on other wolves before her, and Diana thought if he had used poison this time, that the poison was gone by the time he slashed her. She would have to keep an eye on that later, but for the moment her only choice was to release that thought from her mind. They circled, predator and predator. He lunged again, this time lower, aiming to take her legs out from under her. She leapt, twisting mid-air, her claws slashing down across his back as she cleared him. Blood sprayed. He snarled, more anger now than amusement. Good. Diana pressed the advantage. She attacked in a blur, feint, strike, retreat. Then strike again. Faster and unpredictable. She wasn't just fighting him. She was outthinking him. Her claws tore into his side. Her teeth grazed his neck. He snapped back, catching her leg briefly, but she wrenched free, twisting with brutal force, using his grip against him to slam her body into his. They crashed into the ground. Snow exploded around them, white turning red in seconds. Clay roared, surging up, his weight bearing down on her, but Diana shifted, using her speed, slipping from beneath him and driving forward with everything she had. Her jaws closed around his throat. He slashed, massive, violent, desperate, but she didn't let go. Her grip tightened, muscles locking, her entire body focused on one thing, ending him. Bone cracked beneath her bite. His movements faltered, slowed and stopped. Silence fell. Duskfell wolves hesitated. Then one backed away, then another, until the entire line broke. They retreated into the trees, their howls no longer a threat, but a warning of defeat. Their alpha was gone. Diana released Clay's body slowly, stepping back, her chest heaving, blood staining her fur. The battlefield stilled around her. Luna Valley stood, wounded, bloodied, but standing. Eli approached, shifting back as he reached her, his human form appearing through the fading tension of the fight. His chest rose and fell heavily, his eyes searching her for injury. "You're still standing," he said, breathless, but something like awe threaded through it. Diana shifted back, more slowly, her body trembling with the aftermath, with the sheer force of what had just passed through her. There was blood on her skin, fire in her eyes, and something unmistakable in the way the pack looked at her now. Eli stepped closer. "I think it's safe to say they see you as their alpha queen." Diana glanced out over the valley, the wolves watching, waiting, her pack, her people, her birthright, and this time there was no question left in her. The first thing Diana did when she walked back into Luna Valley was go to the healers. Not for herself, though Gareth gave her a look that communicated his professional opinion of her priorities, when she walked past the main healing station with her cracked ribs and her gashed flank and her bitten shoulder, and just kept walking. She received the look and noted it, and kept walking. Because the healers needed to know something before they worked on anyone, and she was the one who needed to tell them. She found the head healer, a steady-handed woman named Bryn, who had been managing Luna Valley's wounded since before Diana was born, triaging at the entrance to the communal hall, where the injured had been brought. Bryn looked up at Diana's approach with the same expression Gareth had given her, slightly elevated in intensity. "Sit down," Bryn said. "In a moment, I need to tell you something first." Bryn straightened from the fighter she was assessing and looked at Diana with the flat patience of a woman who had long experience with wolves who did not sit down when told to. "Clay's pack used poison on their claws when they attacked last time," Diana said. "You remember? My father died because of it. I don't know if they used it today. Eli checked Clay's claws and found no sign, but that means it was either rubbed off in the fighting or wasn't there today." She held Bryn's gaze. "I need you to treat every wound from Duskfell as potentially poisoned until we know otherwise. Every scratch, every bite, anyone who took contact from a Duskfell wolf needs to be seen." Bryn absorbed this without visible alarm, which was one of the qualities Diana had always respected in her. "What does the poison present as?" she asked. "Slow healing, heat in the wound site that doesn't diminish, a grayness at the edges." Diana paused. "My father's healer documented everything. Her notes should be in the pack's records." "I'll have to pull them within the hour." Bryn was already issuing instructions to 2 apprentices working beside her, her voice precise and unhurried. She paused and looked back at Diana. "And you will sit down somewhere in the next 10 minutes, or I will make it a formal directive and send Gareth to enforce it." 15 minutes, Diana said. Bryn's expression indicated that this was not an improvement, but she turned back to her work, and Diana went to find Eli. He was at the eastern edge of the communal ground, with 3 of the senior fighters. She recognized Gareth's second, a broad-shouldered woman named Sable, and two of the pack's most experienced wolves, men who had been fighting Luna Valley's boundaries since Hector's early years. They were deep in tactical conversation when Diana arrived. They stopped when she approached. They looked at her and made a space for her, and Sable said, "We were talking about the boundary reinforcement." She was aware of the fact that they included her in the conversation. She stood with them and talked about the boundary and agreed on the immediate scout rotation and addressed the question of the Duskfell's likely next move, which she and Eli had already assessed and which the fighters had reached the same conclusions about independently. When the tactical conversation had found its natural resting point, it was Sable who said what Diana had been waiting for someone to say. "The council needs to reconvene. Today," Sable said. The two senior fighters looked at each other, and then at Diana. "The whole valley saw," one of them said. Marcus, who had been at the eastern boundary the night Hector was wounded, and had not said 10 unnecessary words in all the years Diana had known him. Ada went inside instead of fighting. "She's no Alpha." He paused. "Every wolf in the town saw it." "Every wolf in that town fought," the other added, "because of you." "Because of all of us," Diana said. "Because you were here," Marcus said. "Clay is dead because you killed him. Our people are alive because you ran at that tree line when Ada was locking herself in the cabin." He looked at her directly. "There isn't a fighter in this valley who will stand behind a council decision that puts someone else in front of you." The warmth in her chest moved as the fighters spoke the truth. "Call the council," she said. "Give the wounded an hour with the healers, then call everyone to the communal hall." She let Bryn see to her ribs in that hour. She sat on the edge of a cot in the healing station and submitted to the examination. She did not make a sound when Bryn's careful hands confirmed that 2 ribs on her right side were cracked, rather than merely offended. The gash on her flank and the one on her forearm from Ada earlier were cleaned and dressed. The shoulder bite was packed with the poultice that smelled powerfully of yarrow and pine resin, and which worked better than it smelled, which was the important thing. Eli sat on the cot across from her when this happened, his own wounds being attended to by one of Bryn's apprentices, and they talked practically about what the council meeting needed to accomplish. "Ada will contest it," Eli said. "She'll try. But her power." "It won't work on me," Diana said. She paused, considering how to explain what she knew. "She would have used it on me in town earlier if she could, to get me to go leave town again. I think whatever the blood moon gave me, her power can't override mine." Eli looked at her for a moment. "Then you need to be in the room," he said. "I intend to be." Bryn tied off the last of the shoulder dressing, and Diana thanked her sincerely and stood up. The communal hall had not held this many people in months since Hector's funeral. They came in still carrying the mourning on them. The fighters with their fresh wounds and their battle-worn faces. The families who had sheltered during the attack, now emerging to find out what had happened and what it meant. The elders who had been part of this pack's history long enough to understand exactly what they were looking at. They filled the hall and the doorways and spilled out into the road beyond. Diana stood at the front of the hall and waited for the noise to find its level. The council filed in from the side door, all 6 of them, Roland at the head. She looked at them as they took their seats, and the warmth in her chest read each face in turn. Discomfort, regret, shame in varying quantities and qualities. Roland looked at the floor as he sat down. Ada was taken prisoner by surprise, gagged and blindfolded to prevent hypnotism. She was brought in by 2 of the pack's senior wolves. In Diana's presence, they removed the gag and blindfold. Ada stood with her chin up, her jaw set, and her eyes going immediately to Diana, with the same expression she had worn in the hallway the night of their father's death, her composure worn down to a fine wire, tight and dangerous. Edna was escorted in behind her. If Ada's response to the situation was a performance of defiance, Edna's was something colder. She came in with a deliberate elegance. She had decided long ago that composure was armor, and she wore it now, not accepting that the armor had failed. She looked at Diana with the cold, measuring look she had given her across breakfast tables for 20 years. For the first time, Diana felt very little about it. Roland called the assembly to order, which took a moment because the assembly had a great deal of feeling about the situation, and not all of it was prepared to be orderly. When the room had found enough quiet to function, he stood and looked at his hands on the table and then looked up at Diana. He chose honesty over comfort, which was not always a natural choice for him, but which he was making now. "The council has met this morning," he said, "before this assembly was called, and we have discussed the events of the past month with a candor that was overdue." He looked at Diana. "We made it quickly and without the deliberation the charter requires, and some of us made it in a state that we have come to understand was compromised." The hall was very quiet. "Compromised?" someone said from the crowd, and the word had an edge in it. "Ada Morgan's alpha power," Roland said, and he didn't look at Ada when he said it, "forces people to bend to her will. The council has reviewed the events of our deliberation, and we have reached the conclusion, individually and collectively, that our judgment on that day was not entirely our own." He stopped. "We failed in our duty to this pack and to Alpha Hector's firstborn, and I am genuinely sorry for it." The room absorbed this. She looked at the 5 other council members. 4 of them were nodding, the nods of people confirming something they had agreed to. The 5th, a man named Eldest, who had sat on the council for 20 years, and whom her father had put on his list with a notation she now understood, who had been in Edna's pocket for longer than the coronation, was looking at the table with disdain. He had only been there because he had no choice. She filed this for later. "Furthermore," Roland continued, "the council has reviewed Ada Morgan's abuse of her alpha power in the context of this pack's governance." He exhaled slowly. "The use of hypnotic power to influence a pack council's deliberation, to manipulate the will of a pack member against their knowledge or consent, and to interfere with the rightful succession of a legitimate alpha, these are not ambiguous violations. They are among the most serious violations a wolf with alpha power can commit." He looked at Ada now, directly. "The council finds Ada Morgan in violation of pack law on all 3 counts." Ada's chin was still up, but something in her jaw had changed. "She went inside," someone said from the crowd, loudly and without preamble. It was one of the fighters, a young woman Diana recognized from the Eastern Boundary Patrol, still in her battle clothes. Clay was attacking, and she went inside and locked the door. The room confirmed this with a collective sound of agreement. "Our alpha doesn't hide," old Petra said, from the 3rd row. She said it quietly, but the hall was quiet enough that it carried. She was looking at Diana when she said it. "The council's ruling on succession," she said. "I'd like to hear it formally." Roland nodded. He had been waiting for this. "The council formally reverses the ruling of the coronation. Diana Morgan is the rightful alpha of Luna Valley by bloodline, by the completed blood moon right, and by the charter provisions for succession. Her human heritage is noted, and the council states formally and for the record that no such heritage disqualifies a wolf from alpha succession under the laws of this pack." He paused. "The ruling stands. Diana Morgan is Alpha Queen of Luna Valley." "This is absurd," Ada said to the room at large. "She's half human. She's always been half human. You've known her whole life, and you know what she is, and a battle with a crazy pack leader doesn't change the basic facts of—" "Ada," Diana said. Ada looked at her. "The pack followed me into battle today. Every wolf in this hall who is able fought alongside me this morning. You did not." She held her sister's gaze. "I'm not going to debate my bloodline with you again. This conversation is finished. You can't just—" "Sit down, Ada." The voice that said this was not Diana's. It was Sable's, from the middle of the hall, delivered with an absolute matter-of-fact authority. Ada sat down. She did it with jerky, childlike reluctance, instinctively obeying an authority figure she had known all her life. Ada was never fit to be an alpha queen. Edna had not spoken throughout the proceeding. She sat in the chair she had been placed in with her hands folded in her lap and her expression sealed, watching the council and the hall with cold attentiveness, rather than reacting. When Diana looked at her, she looked back with the flat measuring regard she had carried for 20 years. She had no remorse or fear, but a cold and patient assessment of the situation, and a cold and patient search for an angle that still worked. "Edna," Diana said. Edna looked at her. "You conspired to steal a succession. You encouraged your daughter to use her alpha power against the governing body of this pack." She held the flat gaze steadily. "These aren't opinions. I will have the evidence before the end of the week, and I will present it to the full council and the full assembly." Edna said nothing. Her expression did not change. "You'll be held until then," Diana said. "Both of you." "You can't hold me," Ada said, the bright, tight composure cracking just enough to let the heat through. "I'm the Alpha Queen," Ada continued. "You were," Sable said. and the two words landed like a period at the end of a very long sentence, and Ada stopped. The question of what to do with Ada's power occupied the council for another hour. It was Marin who spoke to it, arriving at the hall late and making her way to the front in an unhurried pace. She stood before the council and explained, in her practical and precise way, what she knew about the Alpha powers and what could be done about one that had been misused. The blood moon right gives, she said. It can, under specific conditions, also take back. The next blood moon is in 6 weeks. She looked at Diana. The power Ada has cannot be reversed by anyone it can influence. It requires someone immune to it to oversee the reversal. Diana, Roland said. Diana, Marin confirmed. 6 weeks, she said. Ada and Edna are held until the blood moon. The reversal is conducted properly, within the full council as witness. She looked at the room. After the reversal, they are exiled, formally, permanently, with the full authority of the Pax law behind it. She paused. This isn't punishment for being who they are. It's consequence for what they chose to do. Roland called the guards. Ada went out of the hall with her chin still up, which Diana had expected. Edna went out without looking at Diana at all. This, too, was expected. This was, in its cold and characteristic way, entirely Edna. Diana watched the door close behind them, and breathed out slowly, and turned to face the rest of what the day required, which was considerable. Behind her the hall held the warmth of the pack gathered in it. Her pack, her people, the weight of them no longer something she was managing at arm's length, but something she was standing in the center of, where she had always belonged. Her father had told her she was ready. She was finally beginning to believe him. Chapter 13. The moon rose full over Luna Valley. Silver light spilled across the clearing, illuminating the gathered pack, rows of wolves and humans alike, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the ancient trees. Torches flickered, their flames bending gently in the night air, but no one spoke. They were waiting for her. Diana stood at the edge of the circle, her heart steady, her breath calm. She wore no heavy crown, no excessive adornment, only a dark, flowing mantle clasped at her shoulders, its edges stitched with the crest of her father's line. Her hair fell loose down her back. Her gaze was clear, unshaken. Eli stood just behind her, silent but present. When her hand brushed his, he laced her fingers with hers. "You're ready," he said softly. Diana didn't look at him. "I am," and this time she meant it without hesitation. The circle opened as she stepped forward. Every eye followed her. At the center stood the stone altar, worn smooth by generation of Alpha rites. This was where it would happen, where it should have happened all along. An elder stepped forward, voice carrying clearly through the stillness. "Diana Morgan, daughter of Hector Morgan, do you stand before your pack to claim your birthright?" Diana's voice did not waver. "I do." "Do you accept the burden of Alpha, not as ruler alone, but as protector, as strength, as unity?" Her gaze swept over them, her people, her home. "I do." The elder nodded once. "Then step into the light of the moon, and be seen for what you are." Diana moved forward. The moonlight touched her skin. Her wolf surged beneath her skin, intertwined with every part of her being. Human and wolf as one. When the elder placed the crown upon her head, a simple band of dark metal, it felt as if it had always belonged there. A ripple moved through the crowd. Respect, recognition, loyalty. Diana turned to face them fully. Her voice carried without effort. "I am your Alpha Queen." And this time, no one questioned it. After the celebration, Diana returned to the log cabin to get Luna. The cabin stood just as she left it, weathered but strong, a place that had held her when she had nothing else, a place that had reminded her who she was. Diana stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing along the worn wood, the edges of the table, the hearth where she had once sat alone. A soft sound drew her attention. Luna. The sleek black cat emerged from the shadows, knowing Diana would return. Her amber eyes blinked up at her, unimpressed as ever. Diana smiled. "Well," she murmured, crouching slightly, "are you coming with me, or staying here to rule this place alone?" Luna flicked her tail. Then, with quiet dignity, walked straight past her and towards the door. Diana huffed a quiet laugh. "I'll take this as a yes." Before she left, she stepped just beyond the cabin, into the clearing where the trees opened slightly to the sky. She tilted her head back, letting the moonlight wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered. For her mother. for the life she never got to have, and the strength she had passed on anyway. Diana closed her eyes briefly. She felt it now, all of it. Her humanity was not something that weakened her. It gave her perspective, compassion, and balance. When she turned back toward the cabin, there was no hesitation left, only certainty. Luna Valley greeted her differently when she returned. Her people bowed their heads as she passed out of respect. She walked through them with quiet confidence, Luna trotting at her side like she had always belonged there. And at the center, Eli was waiting. He didn't bow. He stepped forward, because he stood beside her, not beneath her. "You disappeared," he said, though his tone held no accusation. "I had something to finish," she replied. His gaze turned briefly to the cat at her side. "I see you've brought reinforcements." "Be nice," Diana said lightly. "She outranks you." Eli exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Then his expression softened. "You were incredible tonight," he said. "You'll be an amazing alpha because you are a wonderful person." The words settled warm in her chest. "And that," he added, reaching into his coat, "is exactly why I can't wait any longer." Diana stilled. He stepped closer. Then he dropped to one knee. The world seemed to quiet around them. "Diana Morgan, Alpha Queen, and the woman I love," her breath caught. "I don't care how long it takes for the packs to merge," he continued. "I don't care what challenges come next. I'll face all of it with you." He held her gaze. "If you'll have me." For a moment she couldn't speak, because this wasn't politics, it was choice, and it was hers. "Yes," she said. Relief and joy broke across his face as he rose, his hands finding hers, pulling her close. "For now," he said, brushing his forehead lightly against hers, "I'll come here. Luna Valley will be yours to rule." "And Stonehaven?" she asked. He smiled. "We'll wait, until the right time. My father is still Alpha, and the urgency is gone for now, with Clay gone." Diana's hand slid to his shoulders, holding him there for just a second longer before she closed the distance between them with a gentle kiss. Luna's tail curved around her feet, and the valley was dark and quiet below her, and the stars were out. Diana sat in the calm, peaceful night, and simply was who she was, which had always been enough.